Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 2561, The Wild Goose Pass. Their choice of going through the Wild Goose Pass to get into the source world was risky. But it was the only reasonable option they had. The trumpet flying ship continued to travel along the space channel. The silence in the ship filled everyone with unrest. The pressure weighed on them like an invisible giant beast circling above their heads, waiting to consume them. Eyeing everyone up, Zen knew he had to speak to break the tension. He hesitated for a while before he gathered the courage to speak. If there is any danger, can you run away alone? Zen looked at her desperately. It was not the best time to say something like this, but Yan was in Emily's inner world. He had to assure her safety. If they encountered the Yellow Emperor guards, Zen hoped Emily could escape so Yan would be safe. Emily glanced at Zen indifferently. She couldn't blame him for saying that. It was understandable how he worried about his sister. He was supposed to protect her after all. She wanted Yan safe too. She thought to herself how much she wanted to take her to the Pearl Hill. Yan's protection was important to her as well. It was part of her mission. She was supposed to keep her safe. Don't worry. If we run into overwhelming danger, I will run away, Emily promised. Zen nodded in approval. If they faced off against the most powerful warriors of the Yellow Emperor guards, there was a possibility of them all getting killed. Even so, Emily's promise of escaping at the first sign of trouble made Zen feel at ease. 3 days passed by quickly. Leopold gently rubbed the jade plate in his hand. A wisp of blue light flashed in front of the trumpet flying ship, allowing them to leave the space channel. As soon as the ship moved out of the space channel, a huge triangular opening came into view. They all looked up in wonder with their mouth agape at the size of it. The opening was formed by 3 10-million-foot-long jade pillars that were connected in the shape of a triangle. Each pillar had unusual patterns etched into it. Hundreds of ships came in and out of the opening. Although Zen had seen most of the world, he was still impressed. He stared at the enormous opening with awe. Is this the Wild Goose Pass? Zen asked with curious eyes. Emily nodded. She felt nostalgic returning to the Wild Goose Pass after many years. She closed her eyes as she recalled the last time she came here. However, now was not the time to get emotional. She straightened herself and glanced at Leopold before she said, "Prepare to form the slaughtering moonlight array. Everyone, stay alert." The other women of the snake goddess race immediately nodded to themselves. They stood on guard and prepared themselves for every possibility. In case of any incidents, they each held a divine crystal in their hands. A dozen giant flying ships were seen moving slowly at a short distance from them. Leopold noticed and began steering the trumpet flying ship to follow them. Leopold came up with the idea of moving along with the cargo ships. He planned to pass through the Wild Goose Pass undetected amid the passing fleet. Above the Wild Goose Pass, Sanjay stood over the intersection of 2 jade pillars. He looked down and scanned all the ships that passed through the Wild Goose Pass. I've been here for 3 days. According to the report from Telmo, that trumpet flying ship should have arrived by now. Unless they took a different route. If they didn't cross the Wild Goose Pass, Sanjay could do nothing to the trumpet flying ship. The source world was too vast. It would take a long time or forever to locate the trumpet flying ship. Even for a powerful master like Sanjay, it was close to impossible to monitor the entire source world to pinpoint their location. However, it was not a trivial issue for the Yellow Emperor guards that someone had hijacked a trumpet flying ship. Even if they chose to take a different route, the Yellow Emperor guards would still stop them. What Sanjay needed to do was to guard the Wild Goose Pass. He kept a close eye on every ship that moved through. Suddenly, his gaze fell on the dozen giant cargo ships. He quickly spotted the trumpet flying ship at the side of one of the passing ships. A smirk appeared on Sanjay's face. You finally came. I didn't expect you to use such a clumsy trick to get by. How foolish. With a gloating face, he tapped his toes lightly. He prepared himself and flew in the chaos gracefully like a white dove for some time. Then he plummeted downward quickly, leaving a white fine line in the air as he flew straight towards the trumpet flying ship. Emily and the others on the trumpet flying ship were alerted when they saw the white thin line streak across the sky. Sanjay wanted to make his presence known, and they sensed it. "It's coming towards us," Leopold said as his face darkened. Emily looked at the growing flying figure as it drew near, and her eyes flashed with a stern light. "Form the slaughtering moonlight array. Quickly, accelerate to rush through the Wild Goose Pass." They couldn't use the grand teleportation to go through the Wild Goose Pass, they had to solely rely on the ship's speed to rush past it. After receiving the order, Leopold formed the slaughtering moonlight array again. At the same time, the trumpet flying ship suddenly trembled and sped up. Like a sharp arrow released from its bow, it flew towards the Wild Goose Pass. The smile on Sanjay's face grew wider as he saw the trumpet flying ship constantly accelerating. He looked amused. He seemed unfazed by the ship's increasing speed to rush past the Wild Goose Pass. As he continued descending in their direction, he pulled his arm out in the air. A thick and wide sword emerged in his hand, and suddenly his speed of falling increased by more than 10 times. Whoosh! He constantly adjusted his position during his flight to approach the trumpet flying ship directly. 100 miles, 50 miles, he closed the distance between himself and the ship. Each second that passed, he drew closer to them. Buzz! The slaughtering moonlight array was ready. Emily raised her head and studied the approaching figure in white. She braced for impact and began gathering silver moonlight in her hand. When the figure was only 10 miles away from them, she gently waved her fingers in the air. At this action, a colorful circle of light emerged. It began to spread itself out into the air. The colorful circle of light later merged itself with the power of the slaughtering moonlight array. She knew the person drawing near had extraordinary strength. She planned on hitting him with a deadly attack. "Hey!" Sanjay, who was descending from the sky, looked at the colorful circle of light with a hint of disdain on his face. The smile on his face disappeared as he stared at the light coming towards him. It was overwhelming, he had to avoid it at all costs. Acting on reflex, he titled his sword. 6 ghost face marks appeared on the blade. The marks came to life and let out loud howling noises that pierced through their ears. "Ah!" The sound waves coming from the sword were colorless and formless. They appeared to only cause discomfort to the ears as they were forced to cover them from the loud noise. However, it was far more dangerous than that. Under the onslaught of the sound waves, the energy gathered at Emily's hand through the connection of the colorful light circle and the slaughtering moonlight array dissipated instantly and disappeared without a trace. Emily watched in horror as her attack failed. Her face immediately turned pale and lost color. "It's the 6 dragon ghost heads. Everyone, abandon the ship. Head to the Wild Goose Pass." Upon seeing the ghost faces marked on the sword, she panicked. Despite that, she tried her best to compose herself and make rational judgments to guide everyone. The moment Emily gave the order, Zen, Leopold and the other people of the snake goddess race quickly rushed out of the trumpet flying ship and headed towards the Wild Goose Pass. Just as they rushed out of the ship, the wide sword in Sanjay's hand came slashing downwards at the ship in an attempt to obliterate them. The slash formed a strong surge of energy. The streak of light it formed was tens of thousands of feet long. The light surged and formed violent fluctuations in space. It was so strong that it made nearby ships shake from its impact. Some heads popped out of the buildings on those huge flying ships. Some of those people were powerful masters at the other shore realm, but most of them were true gods. When they saw the power of the sword in Sanjay's possession, their eyes reflected fear. However, fights like these were like routine in the source world. As long as the battle did not involve them, they would take it as entertainment. Bang! With a piercing sound, the trumpet flying ship went down after being struck by the blade of light. It turned to dust and drowned into space. Chapter 2562, Escape. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The people on the trumpet flying ship transformed into nothing more than bright flashes of light, flying off toward the Wild Goose Pass. When they came into Sanjay's view, a cold smile appeared on his face. Taking a step forward in the air, he once again turned into a thin, white thread and his moving speed increased sharply. In the blink of an eye, he caught up with a woman from the snake goddess race. More specifically, the woman was Betty, who taught Zen the method to build a rebirth land. "Where did you even get this trumpet flying ship?" Sanjay, who followed Betty closely, asked flatly, without the slightest killing intent in his voice. Despite his monotonous voice, Betty said nothing and chose to ignore his question instead. She was very well aware that the man in white was chasing after her. Her face was full-blown proof of her panic. With no other choice, she sped up and flew at her highest speed. No matter how fast she flew though, getting rid of the man in white trailing behind her seemed completely impossible. "Why don't you want to answer my question?" Sanjay prompted gently. He raised his eyebrows slightly and lifted the broadsword in his hand imperceptibly. A split moment later, he had reached Betty's side. The broadsword gently swept over her body, and just like the trumpet-flying ship, she was swallowed up by the sword light only to disappear without a trace. You've only got one chance. If you won't give me an answer, then go to perdition. After he had killed Betty with a single swing of his sword, Sanjay adjusted his direction slightly and caught up with another woman from the snake goddess race. The woman had seen Betty be killed off so easily like that. She grieved, and her face was in despair. Tell me, who did you steal this trumpet-flying ship from? Sanjay's voice was heard once again. The woman screamed in terror and turned around briskly. An extremely strong energy spread out from her cinnabar field and a black, stringy spider web shot towards Sanjay at full speed. The spider web was actually highly toxic and it reeked of a strong, unpleasant stench. She had intended to risk her life. For this reason, she suddenly paused and launched a second, even more violent attack. She was relentless, and as Sanjay matched her speed, he was unexpectedly covered by the spider web. Do you really want to know? Ha ha, then first, you should come to that world along with me. As soon as she finished speaking, the black spider web began to burn in a violent manner. This specific spider web was actually the woman's other shore token. It was extremely poisonous, and even an ordinary other shore realm warrior would definitely die if they were to get caught in it. What was more, as she burned the other shore token, its power had increased by several times. Sizz. The spider web was suddenly shrouded by black smoke, leaving black traces of soot and ash on Sanjay's body. Bertha. When Emily, who was flying forward, noticed this scene below her, her eyes turned red and she looked overwhelmingly sad. For many years in the past, they had stayed in the bone tower together and they had grown in a way that allowed them to treat each other as sisters. Moments before though, Betty had been killed by the man in white, and Bertha had burned her other shore token. She was doomed to die, and she was certainly bound to endure more intense pain. If they were anywhere else than here, Emily would have rushed up and tried her best to fight the man, without a doubt. That said, she had equally promised Zen that she would protect Yan, before and above anything else. Moreover, there were many members of the snake goddess race within her inner world. In such a situation, she could do nothing but try to escape. Are you really trying to burn me to death with just a spider web in the third stage of the other shore? Ha ha, come on. In the spur of the moment, 6 ghost heads appeared on the surface of Sanjay's broadsword. With the ghost heads howling, the black spider web enveloping Sanjay's body collapsed in an instant. Then, without taking a second glance at Bertha, Sanjay passed right by her and rushed to his next target. The other shore token couldn't just stop burning, though. In his eyes, Bertha was already dead to him. As the other shore token continued sizzling, her inner world began to catch fire, too. Within seconds, the raging fire had spread throughout her entire inner world and then, moved on to destroying her entire body. As this whole process played out, her physical body would become trapped by the other shore token. It was said that its confining power stemmed directly from the truth, and the soul simply couldn't escape it. The pain she suffered before she died was absolutely unbearable, at least to any ordinary person. Many of the other shore realm warriors were shocked after they witnessed the miserable situation caused by the burning other shore token. In other words, even if they went all out to fight, they rarely chose to burn the other shore tokens. If Sanjay would have just killed Bertha with a single sword strike, then it would have been a relief for her. However, he didn't do that, and instead, she died a death of indescribable pain. After crossing the Wild Goose Pass in front of us, we can use the grand teleportation technique. We can run as far as our legs will carry us. And then we can enter the sweltering desert. We will meet again in the Excellence City, which is located just north of the desert. Emily expressed with emotion through her life vitality. As long as they rushed into the Wild Goose Pass and employed the grand teleportation technique, the man in white wouldn't be capable of catching up with them. They felt like they had good chances. Fortunately for them, Bertha chose to sacrifice herself and fought Sanjay for a while, stalling for time. Otherwise, Sanjay, who moved at very high speed, could have caught up with the others and killed at least another 4 or 5 people. At that moment, Zen had also activated his internal momentum and cranked it up to the maximum. He flapped his thunder wings, and simultaneously, wisps of spiritual wind began to spiral around him whimsically. Without thinking twice, Zen rushed towards the Wild Goose Pass as fast as he possibly could. In the center of the Wild Goose Pass was a layer of pale yellow enchanted barrier, which, although it wouldn't block outsiders, could prevent the chaotic energy from entering. When Zen rushed into the light yellow enchanted barrier, he turned his head and saw Sanjay's broadsword hacking at someone once more. Another member of the snake goddess race had now been killed by him. Zen stared at Sanjay deeply. It was then that Sanjay raised his head and equally saw Zen watching him. As the only consummate true god among the group of other Shore Realm warriors, Zen was very eye-catching and attention-grabbing. When Sanjay noticed Zen's gaze, his expression filled with surprise. The pair looked at each other for a very short period of time. In the blink of an eye, Zen had already entered the enchanted barrier and disappeared. As soon as Zen made his way into the enchanted barrier, he used the grand teleportation technique. He didn't know what was waiting for him in the sweltering desert, nor what kind of place it could be. In fact, this was Zen's first time setting foot in the source world. Then Zen began to travel continuously through the space by means of the grand teleportation technique. He could cross a distance of several thousand miles every time he moved. After moving several hundred times, he finally stopped and took a very well-needed break. Although his physical body was strong, he felt extremely tired as he had madly activated the internal momentum in order to escape. Boom! Ultimately, he fell down from his mid-air hover and smashed into the hot sand, panting. After resting for a long time, Zen slowly got himself up from the sand, and then jumped up to the top of a sand dune. He stared at the gray desert in the distance, but didn't think about how he could eventually leave this location. Moments ago, just after he rushed into the Wild Goose Pass, he used the grand teleportation technique immediately, not caring about anything. Now though, he wondered whether Sanjay could catch up with Emily. While he was deep in thought, sand and dust suddenly began flying up in the air in the distance. The seemingly calm desert was now hauntingly terrifying and the rolling sandstorm swept towards him. Chapter 2563, The Mysterious Sandstorm. Instantly, a blast of heat, wind, and hard brittle particles surrounded Zen. He was entirely shrouded by the sandstorm. For ordinary mortals and animals, the sandstorm was a dangerous threat, enough to draw blood and lift them off the ground. For Zen, however, it posed no threat at all. The sandstorm swirled furiously around Zen, hurling fragments of broken rock at him, surrounding him in sand particles as big as raindrops. But an invisible barrier surrounded him. Every particle stopped inches away from his skin, and he moved unscathed through the storm. He wondered how he could get to Excellence City, located in the north of the desert. He smiled bitterly to himself, watching the bits of sand and rock flying harmlessly around him. He remembered his first entrance into the Divine Land. He had been alone then. With no one to guide him, he had been slow in his explorations of the Divine Land, and everything had been new and confusing. This time he was with a team led by Emily, who was familiar with the world. Zen had thought this would save him a lot of trouble, but then, he hadn't expected that they would be separated from each other the moment they entered the source world. Although the sandstorm couldn't hurt him, it interfered with his ability to gauge distances and tell which direction he was going. He had already used the grand teleportation over and over again, and yet he was still in the sweltering desert. He had not anticipated the enormity of the desert. He thought that even without the sandstorm, he would probably have some trouble navigating. This is taking too long. I need to find someone who will tell me how to make my way to Excellence City. Zen muttered. He was feeling perturbed, and took a breath to calm down. He stepped forward lightly and disappeared from the spot he stood in. Using the grand teleportation, Zen tried his best to keep moving in the same direction. He figured that traveling in a straight line would be the quickest way out of the desert. Zen kept going, and going. He was getting exasperated again. By his calculations, he had already traveled some 50,000 miles using the grand teleportation. And yet, every time he emerged from the spatial passageway, he still found himself faced with whirling sand on all sides. As he studied the particles of the sandstorm, spinning inches from his face, a strange thought came to Zen. Of course, sandstorms were to be expected in this climate. It was normal for a desert, especially a large one, to have multiple sandstorms on a windy day. But he had traveled 50,000 miles. Was he in a different sandstorm, or still in the same one? If so, it must be massive, a sandstorm colossal beyond anything he had ever seen or imagined. There is no wind strong enough to stir up a sandstorm in such a large scale. How is this possible? He couldn't come up with any answers. Zen frowned, sighed, and used the grand teleportation once more. Buzz. Zen used the grand teleportation 7 more times, following his strategy of moving forward in one direction. He traveled about 400,000 miles more. However, the storm persisted. Wherever he stopped, he was still greeted with rampaging sand. By now, anyone else would be panicking, wondering where they were and how to escape the situation. Zen was not afraid, but he had to admit his strategy wasn't working. He decided to stop moving forward. Instead, he would use the grand teleportation to move upwards. After all, Emily had described the source world as something similar to a squashed egg. What a huge egg it was. He wondered if he was making a mistake. No matter how large the desert, the top of the source world might be even further away. He moved upwards, and to his surprise, things became even stranger. After using the grand teleportation 3 times and reaching a height of 150,000 miles, he found himself still in the sandstorm. He watched the yellow sand rolling furiously in the air beneath him. A sandstorm that's over 150,000 miles high. This cannot be possible. He had considered the sandstorm more of a curiosity than anything else, but now Zen realized the strangeness and began to feel worried. With some desperation, he lowered his altitude back down to ground level, and began to fly forward. He flew very close to the ground. This method of travel was much slower than the grand teleportation, but flying would let him see his surroundings as he moved. He needed to find out more about the desert. For several hours, he flew, and saw nothing but sand and rock around him. Finally, however, a mass of unidentifiable things appeared in the distance on his left side. They were covered in sand. Zen squinted at them, but couldn't even begin to guess what these things could be. Zen had an idea. He focused, and let his spiritual sense spread out. He probed the objects in the distance and sensed flimsy, hollow structures with life moving inside. He got excited. They were tents with people inside. Without hesitation, he adjusted his direction and flew quickly towards the tents. They were covered with thick layers of yellow sand, which swirled in the air around them. The sandstorm had battered the tents very heavily. Zen waved his hand, and the thick sand was cleared from one of the tents. A pocket of clear air now surrounded the tent. Zen saw that the tent had a door made out of a layer of beast hide. He moved closer, and then reached out to lift the curtain. As soon as he opened it, a glint of silver flashed, and a bright sharp knife stabbed at him. The knife swooshed in the air. It was a good, strong knife. It had actually been aimed at his chest, not his face. Calmly, and with lightning speed, Zen reached up and pinched the blade between the fingers of his right hand, holding it in place. "Please don't." It was a woman's voice. More spears emerged from the beast hide curtain, all pointed at Zen's body. It was clear they wanted to kill him. Spears were aimed at his eyes, his throat, and his chest. Zen had no reason to be afraid of ordinary blades or spears. But he did feel some anger at this treatment. There was no need to attack a stranger without warning. He dropped the knife, waved his hands, and grabbed all the spears that stabbed at him. The thin young men who had wielded the spears were caught off guard. They had not expected the stranger to be so powerful. They drew back, but pulled out machetes, watching Zen. The interior of the tent looked small, and there was nowhere for them to retreat. "I'm just passing by. Is this how you treat visitors? Why are you eager to kill me?" Zen asked coldly. He threw the spears on the ground. The young men were slightly abashed at Zen's words, but still looked suspicious. One of them stepped forward. He had a scar on his face, and seemed to be their leader. He glared at Zen and said, "We know who you are. You're a killer sent by the king, aren't you?" Zen was surprised at the accusation, but nevertheless breathed a sigh of relief. At least they spoke the same language. They would be able to communicate clearly. The source world was itself the source of the cultural heritage of the divine land, including their language. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just passing by," Zen replied flatly. Skeptical faces looked back at him. The young men clung to their machetes. They obviously weren't inclined to welcome him in just yet. But then a soft voice spoke from within the inner recesses of the tent. "Let him in." "But Master Maggie," said the young man with a scar, sounding anxious. The woman called Maggie said, "Just let him in. He is clearly strong enough to kill all of us. If he were really sent by the king, we would be dead already." Zen respected the woman's intuition. She was right. He could smash this tent and the people within in a single blow. At Maggie's words, the young men stirred, traces of fear appearing in their eyes as they began to process how Zen had disarmed them. It was true, they were no match for the intruder. The young man hesitated, and then motioned with his hand for his companions to make way for Zen. As they stepped aside, Zen saw that there were passageways connecting the tents to each other. He went inside and into the passage from where the woman's voice had emerged. As he walked forward, a faint fragrance filled his senses. He saw a woman standing in a small tent, covered with a veil. A small round face peered at him from beneath the thin veil. She had deep-set eyes. She was no great beauty, but there was an air of the exotic about her, a sense of charm and vitality. You are a complete stranger to us and our ways. That must mean you arrived here at the sweltering desert by accident, right? A single look was all she needed to know this. Chapter 2564, Maggie's Condition. The Wild Goose Pass was one of the exits from the Source World to the Chaos. Despite not being the most important exit, as the Wild Goose Pass did not belong to any force, it was favored by neutral commercial alliances. The Source World consisted of many powerful forces. Commercial alliances had to bribe these forces to deliver goods past the borders. Some powerful commercial alliances thought it would be better to transport their goods outside the Source World and return to the Source World through every pass, which was also a shortcut. The sweltering desert was adjacent to the Wild Goose Pass. Those who were familiar with the trade routes would naturally not lose their way in this desert. However, there were always some exceptions, such as Zen. Yes, Zen nodded in admission of his predicament. But the woman wouldn't know that Zen was not from the Source World at all. This sandstorm has enshrouded the whole desert. I have been looking for an exit for a long time, but still can't find it. How can I leave the sweltering desert? Zen asked, seizing the chance to clear his own doubts. However, the woman did not directly answer Zen. With a faint smile, she slowly said, "Sir, if you want to leave the sweltering desert, then where are you going?" Zen reckoned that she wouldn't have any connections with the Yellow Emperor guards, so he replied honestly, "Excellence City." The woman showed no surprise on her face. Excellence City is a large city in the north of the sweltering desert. I have been there before. The woman appeared to be evading his question, and this made Zen a little impatient. He asked directly, "In that case, could you tell me how to leave this desert?" The woman replied with a smile, "There is a way to leave this desert, but you have to wait until the sandstorm in the sweltering desert subsides. Then you can walk north all the way out of the desert." Zen also knew that he could not get out of the desert mostly because of this sandstorm. He then asked, "How long will this sandstorm last?" "Once the sandstorm in the sweltering desert starts to blow, it will last for about 1.5 years." Zen frowned slightly at the woman's response. He needed to go to the Excellence City and meet up with Emily and the others. 1.5 years was too long. "Is there no other way?" Zen asked, frustration coloring his voice. The woman replied calmly, "The sandstorm is an illusion created by the mist summoning spirit, who breathed out the air. Normal people cannot exit the sandstorm once they enter it, but people from the sand country like us have a way." Mist summoning spirit? Zen raised his eyebrows slightly. The woman smiled, "It will appear as a powerful beast in your eyes, but it is the god whom we worship. It has been protecting our sand country for a countless number of years." Zen finally had a rough idea of the desert. The sweltering desert was a barren land in the eyes of the warriors at the other shore realm. In truth, this desert was not so barren, there were oases there, as well. There was the sand country, a densely populated country considered as the home of dozens of tribes. The mist-summoning spirit was a fierce beast that inhabited the sweltering desert. This beast was particularly skilled at making illusions. Being able to trap Zen in this sandstorm was enough to prove that the mist-summoning spirit mentioned by the woman was an extremely powerful being. Even another shore realm warrior would not be able to kill it. Logically, most business caravans and flying ships would take a detour after passing through the Wild Goose Pass to avoid the sweltering desert. In his panic, Zen had inadvertently selected a path into this desert and could not find his way out. Due to the existence of the mist-summoning spirit, the citizens of the sand country could live a peaceful life in the desert. Naturally, these people worship this fierce beast as a god. "Since you have mentioned that you know of an exit, please show me the way," Zen entreated. "If there is anything I can do, please let me know." He also understood the meaning of this woman's words. Apparently, she was chased by someone who intended to kill her, and ended up hiding deep within the desert. She asked for his help in a roundabout way. Since she had answered his questions, Zen saw no problem in helping the woman out. The woman's eyes lit up at Zen's words. She had been to the Excellence City before, so she had seen much of the world. She could not gauge this outsider's strength, but she could tell that he was a strong warrior. It would be beneficial to her to ask him for assistance. However, she was afraid that Zen would refuse her, so she didn't speak of it directly. Now that he had taken the initiative to offer help, she was relieved. It was not her intention to deceive, she was only afraid to miss the opportunity that fell from the heavens. "Let me be honest with you. My name is Maggie, and I am a princess of the sand country. A few months ago, due to a rebellion in my country, my brothers were all slaughtered by the new king. Thanks to the protection of the mist summoning spirit, I was able to escape to the desert. I would be extremely grateful if you could help me take back the throne. Her tone suddenly fell. Maggie was well aware that doing Zen a favor by bringing him out of the desert was not sufficient to make a warrior of his caliber take a risk and fight for her. This time, a look of pleading appeared on her beautiful face. The battle for the throne was brutal. She had to leave the Sand Country to save her life. However, the appearance of Zen gave her a glimmer of hope. Zen thought it over. This was not a difficult undertaking for him. Judging from the strength of her bodyguards, he speculated that the warriors of the Sand Country were at the Soul Sea realm or the Spirit Transformation realm. It wouldn't take a lot for him to help her clear her troubles, so he nodded and agreed. In that case, please come with me now. She then summoned her guards to remove the tents. After some preparation, she took out a crooked green flute. As she placed it near her mouth and gently blew, a melodious sound burst forth from the instrument. Woo! Just as the flute started to whistle, a strange happening occurred. The yellow sand rolling around the desert seemed to have heard the music and shifted to both sides to make way for them. What is this? He wondered aloud in awe. Just as the sand moved away, Zen felt a strong aura of space law. It seemed that the illusion of sandstorm was created using the space law, or even the truth of void destruction. Zen had no idea how such a fierce beast hiding in the desert would be able to command such a strange illusion. This flute was given to me by the mist summoning spirit, Maggie confided to Zen in a whisper. By using it, I was able to escape from the Sand Country. Zen glanced at the flute and asked, "Are you the only one in possession of this flute in the entire Sand Country?" If she used this flute to hide in the desert, then it was not surprising that she could escape from those pursuing her. Maggie sadly shook her head. There are a total of 3 flutes in the Sand Country. That is why I am afraid that the new king's people would be able to catch up to us and... Her voice trailed off, her meaning clear. Zen nodded. Since he had found the way to leave the desert, he was no longer so anxious. Maggie played the flute and led the way. No sand came close to them after it had parted to make way for their group. Chapter 2565, A Ruse. The true gods barely cared about any disputes among the numerous ordinary people. In the divine land, those true gods who had proven a godly way all focused their attention on figuring out a way to enter a floating island in hopes of finding better resources. Likewise, the warriors in the source world focused on crossing the Sea of Truth after they reached the consummation of True God realm. Their objective was to reach the other shore realm at the earliest. However, there was one difference between the source world and the divine land. The inhabitants of the divine land were permitted to only live on the outskirts of the divine cities within it, which prohibited them from forming large forces. The number of divine citizens in the source world was much larger compared to that of the divine land itself. The divine citizens even went ahead and formed different countries within it. Of course, thirst for power and inheritance of thrones in those countries caused many disputes among people. Wars and fights broke out in hopes of overthrowing each other and taking control. The Sand Country was just one of the many countries in the source world. After all, the divine citizens were not mere mortals. Even though they hadn't entered the Soul Sea realm, they were not much weaker than the warriors at the Soul Sea realm in terms of physical strength and endurance. Half a day later, Maggie had led Zen to travel over 100 miles. As she led him, she kept using her protective flute to clear away their path in the raging sandstorm. She even constantly switched their routes. Noticing Maggie's strange moves, Zen's face revealed a trace of suspicion. He began to suspect her motives. Why does she keep changing her direction? He put his guard up and followed her with caution. Zen carefully scanned his surroundings. The desert was dull and desolate, and there was almost no scenery which would serve as a landmark. The dunes would change their position every time the wind blew. There was no way to tell where they were. Although she could use the flute to break through space, how did she know where she was going? His suspicions grew with every step she took. He kept a careful watch on her. Zen quickly spread out his spiritual sense secretly and began memorizing the surrounding area of dunes into his mind. He ran his eyes over the place and paid attention to every detail around him. With his present memory, he could remember every significant detail and store it in his mind. 2 hours later, Zen's gaze fell on a dune not far away, and a strange light flashed in the depth of his eyes. There are 7 dunes. Although the location of them has changed a little, I am sure I have been here before. Zen thought to himself. Despite his doubts, Zen remained calm and followed Maggie. He kept a close watch on her and the guards behind them. The guards looked grim. One of them had a scar across his face. He walked behind the group and kept looking around. It looked as though he was on guard against something. Another 2 hours passed. Zen noticed the same 7 dunes they encountered earlier. However, this time they had moved for some distance. At this moment, Zen was almost sure this woman named Maggie was intentionally leading him around in circles. He wondered what she was trying to do. Suspicious as he was, he chose to remain calm and silent. Maggie put her flute down and smiled gently at Zen. "We should be able to find the sand country before it gets dark. Then we'll trouble you to help us," she said softly. A tantalizing smile appeared on her face under the veil. Anyone who saw that smile would be attracted to her, and Zen was no exception. However, after realizing she had been leading him in circles, he became vigilant. He even started doubting the pitiful story she told him earlier. An hour later, not too far away, Zen noticed a pale yellow city wall appear in the rolling sand. There stood a large city before him. The 7 dunes stood on one side of the sand country. Zen blinked his eyes several times in disbelief. Is that the sand country? How did it pop out of nowhere? He thought to himself. This time, Maggie smiled faintly at Zen. "Mr. Luo, please come with me to the sand country and help me kill the king. If I get back the throne, I will reward you profusely in the sand country." Understood. Zen nodded, agreeing to her wish. He continued to follow her, in hopes of finding out what she was up to. The group slowly walked towards the gate of the city. Zen looked at Maggie and asked as he walked, since the king of the sand country usurped the throne, why didn't he send some people to guard the city? It seems that there is no one guarding the city wall. After thinking for a while, Maggie frowned slightly under the veil. She sighed and continued, "All the members of our royal family have been slaughtered. He must be thinking a young girl like me is unlikely to cause any trouble, so there is no need to send any people to guard against us. But I didn't see any other citizens in the sand country. Isn't that strange?" Zen asked again. "The wind and sand are notably strong today, so the citizens might be staying at home. You will see them when you enter the country," Maggie replied. As they were talking, Maggie had led Zen into the city. Just as Maggie had said, Zen saw several citizens walking on the wide streets of the sand country. However, something about the citizens did not sit right with Zen. They were walking strangely. It looked as though they were dragging themselves forward. He looked closely at them, and his eyes flickered with a green light. With the help of his magic vision, their true identity was laid bare to him. They were not people, they were statues made out of sand. "Mr. Luo, please follow me to the imperial palace," urged Maggie. She sounded anxious. However, Zen remained calm and unbothered by it. He asked indifferently, "There are so many citizens in such a big country. What do they live on?" Divine citizens were not warriors. If they hadn't stepped into the Soul Sea realm, they wouldn't be able to live without eating food. Therefore, they needed to grow food and raise animals to survive. They could not have survived on nothing but sand in the large sand country. Zen threw many questions at Maggie along the way. He noticed her taking her time before she could reply to each of them. However, this time she struggled to give a reasonable answer. Zen then smiled and looked at her. There is no one in the sand country, right?" The expressions of Maggie and the guards suddenly changed. She composed herself and answered in an attempt to throw Zen off, "Mr. Luo, are you kidding? How could there be no one in such a big sand city?" Now that Zen was sure she was leading him to an ambush, he let out a cold snort and lightly stomped on the ground with his tiptoe. A terrifying force then spread out and poured down to the ground. The sand on the ground began to spread like ripples under the surging power. It was like the sand around them had turned into waves. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The ripples spreading around Zen formed a strong momentum that could topple mountains and overturn the seas. The rows of houses in the dust and sand began to topple down, and the citizens turned into piles of yellow sand. Zen stood flaunting his strength to the guards and Maggie. The overwhelming demonstration of Zen's power caused Maggie and the guards to retreat out of fear. She shouted as she ran, "Mist summoning spirit. I have brought you a person. Please show yourself." Who? At this moment, the wind was so fierce that the 7 dunes standing outside the city seemed to have grown hands and legs. They quickly spread to Zen's side. As they advanced, the yellow sand on the surface dropped grain by grain and revealed the strong green vines underneath. At the top of each vine, a giant mouth with sharp teeth appeared. Their shapes were strange and they looked grotesque. Is it a plant, or a beast? Zen stared at it in confusion. He had a hint of disappointment on his face. Everything he witnessed in the desert was a ruse. The only thing real was Maggie and the guards, who were divine citizens. They had worked so hard to fool him into coming here, and it was all for this so-called mist-summoning spirit. Chapter 2566, Killing. Maggie had retreated far away with her guards. Under the veil, her exquisite face revealed a hint of excitement. It had been a trap from the very beginning. Although Zen had seen through her little ruse at the last minute, it was too late, she had already achieved her goal. Once the mist-summoning spirit devoured Zen, she and her men would be rewarded handsomely. There are many citizens in the sweltering desert, right? Zen turned his head and asked indifferently, even though the mist-summoning spirit was only a short distance away and he was in imminent danger. A look of surprise came over Maggie's face when she heard his question, but then she smiled sweetly and said, "Of course. It's how we live on. I'm sorry, you're a kind-hearted man." It was already tough for ordinary people to inhabit a barren desert. The existence of the powerful mist-summoning spirit only made it even harder for them. The mist-summoning spirit had an outstanding talent. It could arrange a magic space array and trap lost true gods in it. However, it had a very obvious shortcoming. Since it was a plant, it could barely move around. Some of the civilians living in this desert chose to cooperate with the mist-summoning spirit. They lured any true gods who got lost in the desert to the mist-summoning spirit so that it could devour them. In return, the mist-summoning spirit would secrete some light green sap that could prolong the lives of the civilians and protect them from diseases. Therefore, the civilians made up lies to gain the trust of outsiders, and took them to the mist-summoning spirit. "You are humans. It's a shame for you to collude with a monster," Zen sneered, staring at Maggie. "Ha ha, a consummate true god, what good luck." A strange sound came from the mist-summoning spirit's mouth, which was full of sharp teeth. It turned out that it could actually speak human language. Swish! As soon as it finished its words, a thorn-covered vine shot out from its stem and rolled toward Zen on the desert sand. Zen did not dodge. Instead, he just let the vine wind around his body. "Shame. No, it's just a way to survive," Maggie said with a sly expression on her face. The guards around her laughed scornfully. "Look at the prey sprouting rubbish from his mouth. Death is knocking at his door but he's still talking about shame. This is the first time I've seen such a stupid man. Ha ha. Maggie, I should get more of the mist-summoning spirit's sap like you promised me last time." As they spoke, they all watched Zen being lifted up and dangled upside down by the vine before being swung directly into the mist-summoning spirit's big mouth. The big mouth chomped on its prey, constantly chewing. The mist-summoning spirit was a plant, so it would take a long time to chew Zen into pieces before slowly digesting him. But after chewing for a while, the big mouth suddenly stopped. The other big mouths full of fangs also trembled and stopped in midair. Upon seeing this, Maggie and her men frowned in confusion. "What's wrong? Doesn't that young man taste good? Ha ha." The guards teased. However, a trace of vigilance appeared in Maggie's eyes. She had been feeling uneasy ever since seeing the fearless look on Zen's face just now. The mist-summoning spirit that the people of the Sand Country spoke of was actually the man-eating demon flower. After growing to such a level, it could easily devour true gods. In fact, its magic array could even bewitch powerful warriors at the other shore realm. However, Maggie would usually let them go. It made it a point to never swallow up masters at the other shore realm, because if it did, it would get hurt and everyone would suffer. But Zen was just a consummate true god. By right, the man-eating demon flower should have no problem devouring him. Just as Maggie was pondering over this with a worried look on her face, a tremendous force burst out from the mouth of the man-eating demon flower. Then, Maggie saw the huge mouth suddenly swell up, as if something was trying to break out from it. Bang! The mouth suddenly exploded into pieces, revealing an unharmed and fully intact Zen. In an instant, Zen's body grew to twice its size and continued to grow rapidly. A few moments later, he had become a giant over 10,000 feet tall. After transforming into a wild god, Zen grabbed the 7 big mouths and the vines of the man-eating demon flower and ripped them out of the ground, immediately destroying them. "It's only a part." Zen looked at the torn roots before turning his head to look into the distance. Then, he reached deep under the desert sand and dug a huge hole. At the bottom of the huge hole lay a strange plant with hands and feet. It looked just like a human. As Zen took a closer look, he could faintly see a scared face. "You are the true body of the mist-summoning spirit, right?" Zen sneered, his huge fist already shooting toward the bottom of the hole. "No, I am not. Please, I can give you." The man-eating demon flower begged for mercy, but before it could finish its words, Zen's fist made contact with its body, smashing it into fluid. The serous fluid gave off a faint fragrance that Zen had smelled before, when he had first met Maggie. After killing the man-eating demon flower, Zen dissipated the wild god power in his body and returned to his normal size. Maggie and her men were all staring at Zen, their eyes full of fear. They had never witnessed the power of a wild god before, so what Zen had just done was beyond their understanding. Even most of the powerful warriors at the other shore realm had never heard of the ancient wild gods. Seeing Zen smash the man-eating demon flower with his fist like a giant god had left all of them dumbfounded. Like I said, it's a shame to collude with a monster. What's more, you betrayed my trust, Zen said in a frigid voice. The guards finally came back to their senses and ran away, scattering in all directions. Maggie was the only one who stayed rooted to the spot. With a nonchalant expression on his face, Zen stretched out his hand toward the guards. Lightning gathered at the tips of his fingers and shot out. It traveled several hundred feet before leaping onto the guards, instantly burning their bodies. Why aren't you running? Zen asked, staring at Maggie. With a bitter smile, Maggie answered, if you can kill the mist-summoning spirit that easily, I don't stand a chance. It's useless to run away from you. After all, they were only divine citizens. All this time, they had been able to trap and kill true gods only with the help of the mist-summoning spirit. They had no strength of their own and were at the bottom of the source world. You were right, Zen said expressionlessly. Another beam of lightning shot out from the tips of his fingers and hit Maggie. The shock knocked the flute in her hand to the ground, and her hourglass body was immediately incinerated. Now that Zen had revealed his wild god body to these people, he did not intend to leave any of them alive. Besides, they had all planned to kill him, so he took no mercy on them. Chapter 2567, Release. Soon after Zen killed the man-eating demon flower, the sandstorm that had been raging around the area of about 100 miles instantly vanished. But as Zen gazed into the distance, he could see the billowing sandstorm 100 miles away. It looks like the mist-summoning spirit is not alone in this desert. I am sure there are others like it all over this place, even though the effect of each can only cover 100 miles. If I continue to move forward, I'm afraid I'll fall into the space illusion of another mist-summoning spirit. As he spoke, Zen's gaze fell on the elongated flute lying on the ground. He reached out his hand to grasp it. The flute revolved once before landing in his hand. What kind of flute is this? I am definitely sure that she was lying about it. However, this flute can break the magic array set up by the mist-summoning spirit. It must be a tool that the people of the Sand Country use to cheat the true gods. This might be helpful to get me out of this desert. Just as he finished saying his thoughts aloud, he heard No 9527's voice. Your guess is 100% correct. Haha, looks like you can't be trapped easily. Zen frowned at No 9527's words. All this while you were aware about it? Of course, the actual name of the mist-summoning spirit is man-eating demon flower. It's just a kind of demon plant in its nature. But I have to admit that its space illusion is quite unique, number 9527 said. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Zen demanded. Number 9527 grinned and answered, I wanted you to personally experience the malice of the source world. This is far different from the divine land. The source world's environment is much worse. You can expect such danger everywhere. After a long while, Zen rolled his eyes and spat out, dang. But number 9527 was right on one point. The Divine Land was built by Chiyu for the Nine Li race, so the Forbidden Lands were bound to be the most dangerous places. Outside the Forbidden Lands, however, there wasn't much of a threat because there were almost zero fierce monsters. The Source World was much more dangerous than the Divine Land. There was no Forbidden Lands here, but nevertheless, it was hazardous. While Zen was led around by the people of the Sand Country, he had a rough understanding of the sweltering desert through their conversation. Even though not all Maggie's words were entirely true, he could tell that he was heading in the right direction. After confirming the direction, Zen flew towards the north with the flute. After a short while, he came across the sandstorm again. As soon as he saw the sandstorm, he realized that he was once again trapped in the space illusion. It must be another man-eating demon flower's doing. Zen placed the flute on his lips and gently began playing the notes. With the melodious sound of the flute, the yellow sand that was rolling towards him immediately dispersed on both sides. The long flute could easily break the magic array. Or it was safe to say that in order to let the people of Sand Country lure the prey for them, the man-eating demon flowers would make way for whoever played the flute. This was an agreement between the people of Sand Country and the man-eating demon flowers. Zen could easily find the man-eating demon flower in this space illusion and crushed it with his hands. But there were too many man-eating demon flowers in the sweltering desert, and time was not his friend to kill them all. Zen continued to play the flute as he flew by. Suddenly, his gaze landed upon a woman in black, lying on top of a dune. As he approached her, he could see that the woman's leg was injured. The woman also felt Zen's presence, as she looked up with a pair of beautiful eyes. Her mouth moved slightly, she was just in the process of asking for help when she saw the flute in his hand. Her expression instantly changed. Zen stared at the woman with a sneer. The thunder internal momentum in his hand condensed, as a ray of lightning took shape. When the woman saw this, her face turned deathly pale. She immediately climbed up from the dune and ran away. The woman was obviously from the sand country. Lying on the dune, she had every intention to capture the true gods who got lost in the desert. As soon as she sighted the flute, she must have realized that her game was up. Zen did not waste time chasing after the woman. He continued to play the flute and flew forward. Along the way to the north, Zen encountered more than a dozen such people of the sand country. All had similar tricks up their sleeves. Some of them pretended to be a group of refugees, while some were beautiful women all by themselves. Their beauty was truly mesmerizing to trap their clueless prey. After 8 hours of continuous flight in the sandstorm, Zen finally saw a green hue standing out in the yellow desert. A few green shrubs dotted the desert like pretty little stars. As he continued to go north, he saw more and more green shrubs. After passing a clear river, he finally left the sweltering desert. On the other side of the river was a brown land, and in the distance, there loomed a massive city. That should be the excellent city that Emily had mentioned earlier, Zen muttered as he looked into the distance. Zen didn't enter the city at once. Instead, he found a secret spot and set up a magic array. Then he sat cross-legged, turned into an avatar and entered his inner world. He had promised the evil god that he would let him out as soon as he entered the source world. However, after entering the source world, he got trapped in the desert. It did not seem right to leave the evil god there. The evil god had been restless in the past few days. He was afraid that Zen might forget his promise. After the evil god reached the consummation of true god realm, he had to practice the ways blending energy again. That was because the internal momentum that he had previously merged was not on consummate level. The sequence of the godly ways to be merged remained the same, and his speed was also not slow. But there continued to occur many explosions along the way. It could be because he was anxious to leave the world as soon as possible. Or perhaps he caused the troubles deliberately. At one time, the ways blending energy at the consummation level exploded with great power. The barren land was blasted into pieces. Good thing was, the land was not inhabited. As soon as Zen appeared in front of him, his eyes lit up with hope. He stood up, as he stared at Zen and asked eagerly, Can I leave now? Zen looked at the evil god's restless and eager face and smiled faintly. If I don't let you out now, I'm afraid you'll ruin my inner world. The evil god smiled sheepishly. Aren't you going to say goodbye to your wife? Zen asked. No need for that, said the evil god, shaking his head affirmatively. Well, then, relax yourself, Zen said as he pushed the evil god. The evil god felt an invisible force grab him, and by that force, he felt himself rising above. He flew across the blue sky, white clouds and 9 stars and then into the depths of the world. Soon after, he felt the sky and the earth spinning. Then he fell to the ground, to be greeted by a brand new world. Chapter 2568, Entering the Excellent City. The evil god stood still while he gazed out into the world. It was as if he was feeling the pulse of the new world. In fact, Zen found it hard to guess what the evil god thought. He believed that this brand new world was a good starting point for evil god. I could see the isolated and barren desert over there, and there is a big city. Where is this place? The evil god asked. His question forced Zen to pause for a while. Honestly, I am not too sure. Zen squinted at once then shook his head, oblivious to the question. You don't know either. The evil god stared at Zen in disbelief and shuffled backward a few steps, both hands clasped behind his back. For the time being, Zen found it hard to explain the relationship between the source world, the divine land, the universe, and the chaos. He replied, yeah, because it's also the first time that I have set foot in this place, just like you. You can call it the source world, which is also the biggest world. Is there any other world outside apart from this one? The evil god inquired further, eager to discover more. There is, known as the chaos, Zen stated, matter-of-factly. The evil god, absorbed in his thought, fell silent. Is there another world beyond the chaos? He continued to ask. Zen shrugged his shoulders and shook his head. I don't know. The problem involved appeared simple, but it covered the category of philosophy. Zen's knowledge of the entire world was confined within the vast chaos. The evil god's face showed no sign of disappointment despite the lack of decent answers from Zen. He felt relieved after his greatest ambition happened. He finally broke free from Zen's inner world. Since this case is unresolved, I will explore and find the answers myself. Let's end there. The evil god smiled as he obligingly bowed before Zen. But at the back of his mind, he could not stop thinking how much he wanted to be far away from him. His body then diffused wisps of the internal momentum from both spiritual wind godly way and thunderstorm godly way. Once the two magical forces mixed, it formed a unique theurgy beyond these two godly ways, the wind-thunder escape skill he had created himself. Whoosh! Equipped with the escape skill, the evil god flew along the river and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The evil god maintained great respect for Zen on the surface even though he felt absolute animosity towards him. He reasoned that if his inner world had remained the same and never shifted into a rebirth land, they would have exchanged blows by then. He avoided the sweltering desert and hesitated to go to the excellent city. Instead, he preferred to follow the water. He is too clever for me, Zen muttered to himself. I wonder if fate will allow us to meet again. Zen knew that the likes of evil god, armed with intelligence and skills, often succeeded by performing greater things. Determined to make a voice in the source world, he could earn himself a noble status and a chance to sit on top of the hierarchy. After standing motionless for a while, Zen headed towards Excellent City. The divine cities in the divine land were guarded by the slates, so they had become places of valuable resources for cultivation, and those warriors who wanted to gain access to those divine sites had to pay a certain amount of divine might coins. By contrast, the Excellent City, a big city in the source world, was an open city that was accessible to anyone. Shortly after Zen showed up at the city gate, he noticed countless divine citizens come and go in an endless flow. He took a glimpse of the fiercest warriors among the multitude of divine citizens. A significant number were at the Soul Sea realm, the Spirit Supreme realm, and the Spirit Transformation realm. To add, rare faces of true gods blended with the huge crowd. Despite the perils involved, Zen did not hide his strength. It was even more dangerous if he concealed his powers in an unfamiliar environment. He wanted to fend off suspicions in case he got noticed. After Zen examined the surroundings, he walked without the slightest hesitation into Excellent City together with other divine citizens. Once inside the city, he felt several spiritual senses sweep past him. Judging from the strength of energy Zen picked up, whoever released these forces should have souls of light. This meant that they were at least consummate true gods. It perplexed Zen where these spiritual senses originated, so he pretended not to know. He strolled through the open streets and scrutinized the place. If Emily and her companions escaped the man in white, they should have already reached the Excellent City. Zen wondered if Emily, Leopold, and the rest left behind any mark or alternative means of contact. But soon Zen pushed that possibility aside. There were just simply too many divine citizens and buildings in the Excellent City. Even the central divine cities in the divine land couldn't compare to this city. It appeared necessary for him to stay in Excellent City for a period of time. He needed to find a way to collect some substantial information. He hesitated to stick around. If he failed to get any news of Emily and the others here, would this mean that he would be stuck in this city for a long time? This was certainly not what he wanted. Zen felt distressed when suddenly he heard a faint voice murmur, "Friend, what brought you here to the Excellent City?" Zen tensed up, furrowed his eyebrows, and spun around. His gaze landed on a long-haired youthful man who sat on the second floor of a building several thousand feet away. This individual was at the consummation of the true god realm. This was the first consummate true god that Zen had found in the source world. In Zen's mind, there should exist many powerful masters in the source world, and even someone like Emily was not the strongest. Moreover, he thought that there might be tons of consummate true gods in the source world. But what he saw now in Excellent City contradicted on what he imagined. "I'm just passing by," Zen responded through pursed lips using chaotic energy. The young man showed a half smile but shook his head and said to Zen, "Whether you are just passing by or staying for a while, I insist that you join me up here for a chat." Without hesitation, Zen sped up to the building. In a split second, he arrived on top of the stairs and sat opposite the young man. "My name is Kenom Lai. And may I ask you what is yours?" The young man gently cupped his hands towards Zen. Zen returned a salute. "Zen Luo," came the reply. The answer stunned Kenom. "Your surname is Luo. It is remarkably rare." Although the divine land inherited its cultural heritage from the source world, they still differed in some aspects. In most clans, natural birth established family names. The surname Luo long existed in the divine land, but Kenom heard it from Zen the first time in the source world. "I wonder why you invited me here." Zen probed while scratching his head, looking confused. With a vague hint of a smile, Kenom confessed, "It's rare to see any consummate true god come to this city. Since you have come here, I believe some people have noticed you and are ready to contact you, but I'd say that I was lucky to have a chat with you ahead." The young man caught Zen off guard with this unusual announcement. Listening to Kenom made him consider how sought after he would be in Excellence City. He doubted this since he was only a consummate true god. Zen reflected on the incident earlier when the spiritual senses scanned him the moment he stepped into the city. This convinced him it could be true. Then Zen proceeded after breaking free from his thoughts. "I am just passing by Excellence City, and I have no intention of staying here or joining any forces." But he sounded more defensive than convincing. Zen faced him with an upfront rejection even before Kenom could offer anything. Bitter disappointment reflected on his face. Recently, the peace and balance in Excellence City got disrupted. Kenom found it essential if he could secure the help of another consummate true god. Just then, Zen continued, "I have something to ask you." When Kenom heard that Zen needed to inquire something, he got intrigued. With brows elevated, he urged, "What do you want to know? Were there any other Shore Realm warriors who entered Excellence City recently?" Zen asked quietly. Chapter 2569, The Mice League. Excellence City was the first big city to be seen after one had successfully crossed the Wild Goose Pass. Trade groups would usually choose to take a rest in the city. There were also many warriors at the other Shore Realm. Not knowing why Zen asked such a question, Kenom replied with caution, "Big commercial groups arrive at the east port of Excellence City every day, and those business groups all have other Shore Realm warriors. So, yeah, there were other Shore Realm warriors that entered this city." "Zen, are you looking for someone in particular?" Zen nodded his head slightly and said, "I'm looking for a woman at the other Shore Realm." He then proceeded to describe Emily's appearance roughly, including the way she dressed. Don't think I've ever seen her before." Kenom shrugged as he shook his head. Zen, of course, wasn't surprised at all. He believed that seeing as Emily was the most powerful warrior in her group, the man in white would focus on chasing after her in particular. Even if Emily had all the luck and succeeded in ditching the man in white, she would still have to keep her identity a secret. In other words, with the way Zen was looking for her, it would undoubtedly be fruitless. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Zen nodded briskly and then stood up, preparing himself to leave. "I'm not sure, but perhaps the members of the Mice League know. If you want to buy news from the Mice League, I can take you there," added Kenom. "Huh, the Mice League, what's that?" Zen asked curiously. A trace of surprise crept across Kenom's features. "Zen, have you truly never heard of the Mice League?" Zen shook his head. He really didn't know who, or what, the Mice League was. "Then it'll be worth the trip, Zen. Trust me on that one. There's probably nothing in this world that the Mice League don't know about, but their information must be purchased with divine crystals. I'd be curious to know if you have enough divine crystals to purchase their information," Kenom explained. When he heard Kenom mention divine crystals, Zen immediately asked, "Do you know how many divine crystals they require if I want them to help me find someone?" "I'd say at least a whole divine crystal would be needed," answered Kenom, hesitating a little. Considering that Zen didn't even know about the Mice League and that the Excellence City was very close to the Wild Goose Pass, Kenom suspected that Zen came from some remote area outside the source world. Generally speaking, the people from remote areas were usually very poor, causing Kenom to believe it impossible for Zen to possess many divine crystals, if any at all. In an attempt to coup Zen, Kenom considered whether or not to pay it for Zen. It still remained that to him, a divine crystal was a large sum of money, so he hesitated on making a decision. An entire divine crystal. Zen was stunned by the price and it could be heard in his voice. He didn't have a concept about a divine crystal's true value. The legacies he had obtained were left by Chiyu back in the Divine Land. On this trip to the Source World, he had brought nearly half of his divine crystals with him. The price, one divine crystal, was unexpectedly much too cheap in his opinion. Kenom, on the other hand, misunderstood Zen's reaction and thought Zen was terrified by how expensive it was. He continued to believe that getting Zen over to his side after paying the one divine crystal for him would be worth it. After all, he was short of hands at this time. He gritted his teeth and said, "The information coming from the Mice League isn't cheap. If you really can't afford the price, I just might be able to help you out." Staring at Kenom's begrudging expression, Zen suddenly found the situation quite funny. He believed, however, that Kenom was well-intentioned. A divine crystal was a very valuable object to a consummate true god. Zen was quick to grasp the fact that this person was trying to pull him over to his side. Still, he was thankful for Kenom's generosity. Seeing as they had just met, it was very rare for anybody to offer such a gesture. I don't want to be hassle, no worries. Although the price for a piece of information is high, I can still afford it. Please lead the way, Zen said. Kenom looked at Zen suspiciously. He continued to doubt the fact that Zen could afford a divine crystal, but he still led him away from the building. So, tell me, who established the Mice League? Can you really buy information from them? Zen questioned. Both the sweltering desert and the surrounding areas had vast spaces, and the description Zen had provided of the woman he was looking for was almost without any features. Thus, he held a skeptical attitude as to whether or not he'd obtain any information from the Mice League. Kenom, on the other hand, really sounded quite confident. Since you've never heard of the Mice League before, you certainly don't know how magical they are. They really know everything. You will soon understand what I'm saying. 5 minutes later, they had walked across more than half of the city, ultimately reaching the east end. The streets in the east of the city were even wider, but there were fewer people. After a short while, they stopped in front of a big house. 2 tough-looking guards stood with their arms crossed at the door. They were strong cultivators at the consummation of true God realm. The way they dressed themselves was odd, though. They were both wrapped in dark robes, which seemed to have the function of blocking the spiritual senses from outsiders. Here we are. Zen, you can enter freely. The Mice League have many rules. I can only wait outside, said Kenom flatly. As Zen walked toward the entrance, one of the guards came up to him and asked, "Are you looking for someone or something in particular?" As soon as he heard the guard's voice, Zen frowned slightly. The voice was so sharp that he felt it wasn't even human. "Looking for someone," replied Zen with certainty. "And are you aware of the rules?" The guard continued to question. "No, I'm not," replied Zen, a little less confidently this time. "Once our information is sold, there will be no refund. Moreover, you can't tell anyone that the information comes from us. If you violate the rules, you will be placed on our hunt list," the guard continued speaking in a shrill voice. These rules. Zen thought to himself quickly for a moment and soon understood. No matter where it was, sensitive information was bound to exist. Logically, it must also be risky for the Mice League to collect information from everywhere. If somehow, the information was leaked, resulting in angering certain powerful warriors, the Mice League would be the ones to face the consequences. Therefore, simply put, the Mice League had created these rules in order to protect themselves. "Are you willing to follow these rules?" the guard asked. Zen nodded his head in agreement. "Of course I do." As he spoke, he suddenly saw the guard's real face through the gap in his robes, and Zen was absolutely shocked. The guard had a sharp, straight mouth, 2 bean-shaped eyes, and his face was covered with very fluffy, gray fur. He clearly wasn't human. Oh, no, he definitely wasn't. He was a mouse. The guard also noticed Zen's astonishment and tightened his gray robes at once. Then he said in a sharp voice, "Go inside. Turn left and go straight to the end. From there, you'll get the information you're looking for. Go on." Both guards were actually ferocious mice. If he were in the divine land, Zen would have already killed them in the blink of an eye. However, this was the source world, and there were many things about this world that Zen couldn't understand yet, after all. For this reason, he suppressed the desire to kill that overwhelmed his mind and soul. There's no wonder it's called the Mice League. It was probably formed by a group of mice. As these thoughts raced through Zen's mind, he entered the courtyard. Squeak, squeak, squeak. As soon as he set foot inside the courtyard, Zen heard mice all over and everywhere. They were of different shapes and sizes, running around at free will. Just as he was told, Zen turned left and walked to the end of the path. There, he saw a white curtain. As he approached, a sharp voice was heard coming behind the curtain. "Come in. Is there also a ferocious mouse inside?" Zen couldn't help but think as he lifted the curtain with one hand. Chapter 2570, The Ear Mouse. As Zen had expected, it was not a person behind the curtain. It was a mouse. The mouse was as tall as a man. It hinted humanistic habits as it sat elegantly with its legs crossed on the ground. There was an unusual magical array surrounding it. The mouse looked at Zen and closed its eyes. Wide eyes sense hostility. It slowly opened them and glanced at Zen with a stern expression. It seemed to be able to read his mind. Zen was taken aback and immediately replied, "I'm just not used to being around fierce beasts." In the divine land, some people kept fierce beasts like pets. There were also contractual beasts. The beasts were not used to blending in with humans they were unfamiliar with. Mostly they only communicated with their owners. They had little to no knowledge about human society. However, things were different in the source world. Beasts and humans lived amongst each other in harmony. They lived like equals and they each had an individual status in their society. All of this was still new to Zen. In the sweltering desert, he condemned the people of the Sand Country for closely cooperating with the man-eating demon flower. He found it bizarre for humans to be interacting with fierce beasts. Now it seemed that it was common for folks and beasts to blend with each other in the source world. The mouse appeared unbothered by Zen's attitude and asked, "I heard that you were looking for someone. Is that correct?" "Yes," Zen answered with a slight nod. The mouse stared blankly at Zen and continued asking more questions. "What's the cultivation level of that person? What does the person look like? When and where did this person last appear? The more details you give to me, the easier it is for me to find this person." Zen straightened up and began recalling everything he remembered about Emily. He thought for a moment before replying in a serious tone. 3 days ago, she entered the Wild Goose Pass from the chaos. I don't know whether she passed through the sweltering desert. She is a powerful warrior at the other shore realm." Zen was cautious enough to not give away too much information about Emily. He feared a link between the Mice League and the Yellow Emperor Guards. He wanted to avoid it, even if there was a slight chance of it being true. But then again, the Yellow Emperor Guard's strength far surpassed Emily's. They might have had close to no involvement with what happened at the Excellent City. Zen continued to have a debate with himself in his thoughts before deciding on telling the mouse everything he knew. The mouse listened attentively and nodded at Zen's words. The expression of the mouse turned serious. It composed itself and waved its 2 paws gently in the air. The 2 huge ears on the top of its head stood up like antennas. The ears of the mouse were bigger compared to its head. They gave it an exotic appeal. The small head and long ears made it look more like a rabbit than a mouse. Buzz. Suddenly, the magic array lying dormant on the ground came to life. Zen focused as he felt a strong spiritual sense pour itself into the array. The mouse closed its eyes and entered a state of meditation. The presence of magic in the room rose to a noticeable amount. Zen tried not to blink as he watched the mouse curiously. I did not expect the ear mice to have developed so quickly. They even appeared in such a remote city. Haha, no 9527's voice resounded from Zen's mind. The ear mice. Do all these mice belong to this race? Zen asked while raising his brows in wonder. Number 9527 smiled lightly. No, the other mice in this house are nothing more than mice with mediocre talents. Some of them can transform into human beings, while some don't even have intelligence. They are not ear mice. The mouse in front of you is the only ear mouse here. Can they live peacefully with human beings? Zen asked with concern. On his way to the source world, Emily and the others had told him many things about this world. However, the source world was so large that it was impossible to educate him about everything in it. Zen had to experience and learn gradually on his own. Yes, what's so strange about that? Human beings are not alone in the source world. If you visit the city of the ear mice, you will be an alien in their eyes, number 9527 answered in a calm and patient tone. The Chaos Ancient Gods like Gerald and Herbert were not human beings. The Snake Goddess wasn't considered as a human being either. The concept of human beings was established after the Snake Goddess had created the Grand World Cultivation Method. The spies of the ear mice can be found throughout the source world. They communicate with each other, so they know everything in this world. It is wise of you to inquire about Emily's whereabouts from them, number 9527 said. Zen couldn't help but feel uneasy with all this. This was all so new to him. Ever since his childhood, he had always seen fierce beasts as inferior beings to the human race. He never considered them as equals. And now in a world so different from his, he got to see them in a different light. Buzz. The magic array on the ground of the room intensified and became brighter and brighter. Zen could feel countless strands of tiny spiritual sense pouring into it. The spiritual sense belonged to the mice. They were scattered across the source world, each pouring in the spiritual sense that contained information from a different place. They sent the news they saw, heard, and knew to the ear mouse. The ear mouse acted as a link between them and the world. Soon after, the light of the magic array faded away. The ear mouse opened its eyes and glanced at Zen expressionlessly. I've found the person you were looking for. Zen's face revealed a trace of joy when he heard this. He heaved a sigh of relief. Where is she? Is she alive? Zen held his breath as he asked this. He prayed Emily was safe. The ear mouse pushed over a porcelain plate towards him and said, It's a piece of expensive news. It's worth 20 divine crystals. If you're willing to pay for it, place the divine crystals on the plate, and I'll tell you. 20 divine crystals. Zen eyed the ear mouse in disbelief. He had plenty of divine crystals, but Kinom had told him that he only needed to pay 1 for the information. Now the price suddenly increased 20-fold, so it was naturally a little difficult for him to stomach. The news is graded. Some important news sells high. We collect the news in this world with our ears, so we know the right value. If you are unwilling to pay the high price, you can leave. The ear mouse shrugged as it pointed towards the exit. It had been used to this kind of thing, so it didn't bother with forcing Zen to pay. Zen was left with no other choice. He sighed and raised his right hand and tapped the space ring gently on the plate. He bit his lip as he watched the 20 divine crystals fall on the plate one by one. The ear mouse pushed the plate aside and drew a line in the magic array on the ground with its sharp claw. Soon, a holographic illusion appeared before Zen's face. He saw the image of Emily and Leopold standing side by side. They seemed terrified and confused. His eyes widened as he scanned the environment around them. Judging from their surroundings, it didn't seem like they were in the sweltering desert. They were in a plain. Where are they? What is that place? Zen asked, with his stare fixated on Emily in the illusion. The Cyan Brocade Plain, 2 million miles away from the Excellence City, answered the ear mouse. They are not Yellow Emperor guards, but they have the slaughtering moonlight array. It's quite interesting. The illusion only lasted for a few seconds before it faded. Zen asked desperately, is that all? He saw Emily and Leopold had activated the slaughtering moonlight array, so he assumed they hadn't gotten rid of the man in white yet. His eyes reflected how impatient he was to know what happened to them. Of course not. What you saw is just the scene sent by one of the many mice, the ear mouse said. It once again stretched out its sharp claw to draw another line in the magic array. Soon, a new illusion appeared in front of Zen. He saw a dazzling blue light on the screen. The man in white was still chasing after Emily and Leopold. Zen's heartbeat quickened as he witnessed the intense situation. He desperately wished to be with them to help. His heart rate quickly came to a sharp drop. His eyes widened at the scene before him as it paralyzed his entire body in shock. The man in white had swung his sword at Leopold, who failed to dodge it in time. Zen watched in horror as the blade pierced through Leopold's chest, impaling him. Chapter 2571, Rule. Zen couldn't get a full, clear picture. He saw only fragments of what he was being shown to him. He saw Leopold being stabbed by the man dressed in white when suddenly the image stopped. Zen was left anxious, worrying for Leopold's life. He glared fiercely at the ear mouse who responded in an unhurried tone, this is all I can show you with the 20 divine crystals you paid. If you wish to see more it is going to cost you more. It was true that all mice were cunning creatures. How many more divine crystals do I have to pay? Zen asked, frustrated and containing his anger. 100 more, the ear mouse replied, a sly glint in its eyes. Zen had enough divine crystals, so that was not a problem for him. He just hated having his fears being taken advantage of and used against him. Were they in the divine land, Zen would have given this mouse what it deserved. However, Zen was a stranger to the source world and had no backup here. The ear mice were familiar even to number 9527, which meant this race had great power here and it would be ill-advised for him to provoke them. Zen clenched his fists and swallowed his anger. Is 100 divine crystals enough to buy all I need to know? Zen inquired. Zen had to ask such a question or the ear mouse would undoubtedly take the opportunity to con more divine crystals out of him. The ear mouse squeaked and laughed before admitting, yes, 100 divine crystals will be enough. Zen snorted and waved his hand above the large porcelain plate. Another 100 divine crystals fell from his sleeve and stacked neatly together. With a devious grin, the ear mouse stretched out its claw and gently swept across the magic array. Zen could see Leopold again. Emily appeared immediately after he had been struck by the man in white, and dragged him out of the way. The strike of the sword had not taken Leopold's life but the ground was left painted with his blood. As Emily moved him, several hundred circles of colorful light burst from Emily's body. Zen had never seen Emily conjure so many circles of light all at once. He soon realized warriors of the other shore realm like Emily needed the divine crystals to maximize their power. Emily had not had even a single divine crystal with her before. On their way to the source world, Zen had distributed several hundred divine crystals to every warrior at the other shore realm. It looked like Emily had gone all out against the man dressed in white. The rings of colorful light housed an intense deadly force that could be felt resonating from them. Emily continued shuffling along with Leopold as the rings began shuddering and connecting with one another, forming a huge maze enveloping the man in white. It still wasn't enough, and the man took only a few seconds to break through and emerge, a terrifying sight. Fortunately, as Zen saw, Emily had already managed to escape with Leopold. The man dressed in white was left with no one else in sight. Zen was unfamiliar with the technique Emily used to escape, and he could not figure out how she had done it. It seemed the man in white could not either. He searched and searched, eventually having to accept defeat and give up his pursuit. Seeing this, Zen let out a deep sigh of relief. Both Emily and Leopold were still alive. This was the best news possible. They have indeed escaped successfully. But is there not more you wish to know? For instance, you could learn the identity of this man in white, should you pay an additional 50 divine crystals. The ear mouse pressed on, staring intently at Zen. Without hesitation, Zen threw out another 50 divine crystals before the mouse could even finish speaking. The ear mouse was taken aback. It was very difficult for an ordinary consummate true god to possess more than 5 divine crystals, and here Zen had already paid close to 200. The man's name is Sanjay. He belongs to the Bearing race. He ranks among the last 3,000 of the Sky Guard Pavilion, but he is excellent enough. He is skilled with a broad-edged sword. His other short token is. The ear mouse revealed almost every imaginable detail of the man in white to Zen. Zen took it all in, believing what he had just heard. The Mice League was far more impressive than he had expected. The ear mouse knew everything there was to know about Sanjay, as if he had absolutely no secrets from them. As far as I know, the Bearing race is a great race in the Source world. Aren't you afraid of retaliation from Yellow Emperor guards when they find out you gather their information and sell it to anyone who can pay? Zen asked curiously. It was taboo to reveal anyone's detailed information and secrets to others, so Zen gathered that it was impossible for the other great races to let the Mice League go on like this consequence-free. Retaliate against us? The ear mouse appeared viciously insulted. They don't have the ability to do that. The Mice League was spread throughout the various provinces in the Source world. Although they were a serious annoyance to the other great races, nothing could be done about it. The Mice League operated in mysterious ways. Nevertheless, Zen got what he came for with the divine crystals paid. He cupped his hands to the ear mouse and made for the exit. As he was leaving the room, the ear mouse warned, "You remember the rules, don't you? You are not to reveal to another soul the information you bought here today. If you violate the rule, we will chase you to the ends of the earth. You best keep that in mind." Zen nodded politely and left the room. The Mice League were a greedy bunch, but they attached great importance to their rules. Zen was generous with his money, and it was obvious that he had plenty of divine crystals. Yet even with this knowledge, the ear mouse would not continue to try and split him from his divine crystals. In respect of that, Zen was required to obey their rules. This was their way of doing business. Zen left the house to find Kenom waiting outside. Kenom walked up to greet Zen. "Get anything useful from them, Zen?" Kenom asked with a friendly smile. Zen smiled and nodded. He seemed somewhat uneasy around Kenom. "That's great. There's indeed no information in this world that you can't get from the Mice League. By the way, Zen, what's your next move?" Kenom asked. When Zen and Kenom first met, Kenom's intention to befriend Zen was clear. However, since Zen had denied their friendship before, he could not ask for it again, and the best he could do was be helpful and charming and hope. "I'm going too." All Zen had been concerned with was his sister's safety. Now that he had discovered she escaped safely, he was both relieved and a tad lost. What should I do next? Zen wondered. According to their original plan in the Divine Land, Chiyu should have arranged Zen's next move. However, Chiyu hadn't revealed it to Zen, but instead made a deal with No. 9527. It seemed he should inquire with number 9527 for the answer to his question. It occurred to him he still knew very little about the Source world. It would probably be prudent for him to stay in the Excellent City and get a basic understanding of the Source world. "If you have no place to go, I can arrange a place for you to stay if you'd like," offered Kenom. Although Zen only knew Kenom for a short time, he knew he was not a cunning and insidious person. What was more, Kenom had helped him to locate the Mice League. There was no reason for Zen to distrust him and decline his invitation, so he didn't. Led by Kenom, Zen walked across half the Excellent City and arrived at a house that Kenom had found for him to stay in. Over the next few days he stayed in the Excellent City, Kenom for company and a provider of a rudimentary understanding of the city's environment. Chapter 2572, The Sword Light Palace. Beyond Wild Goose Pass, from sweltering desert to Excellence City and Cyan Brocade Plain, all these areas belong to the Gracious Province. It was a very vast province. Excellence City was merely a springboard to get to other cities. All the large commercial flying ships passing by would quickly replenish themselves in the city and leave for the next destination. After staying in the Excellence City for a few days, Zen had a rough understanding of the city. Kenom, according to you, it sounds like it would take a lot of work to move from one province to another one, said Zen. Kenom confirmed, indeed, the source world is said to be a complete and integrated world, but actually each of its provinces is like a smaller world. Most of the warriors and even the true gods find it hard to travel between provinces. Zen had believed that the source world was a complete world like the divine land, but now he realized that he had been wrong. In comparison, the layout of the source world was similar to that of the great worlds. Each of the provinces was equivalent to an independent world, and each province was distinctive. In which province is Pear Hill located? Is it far from here? Zen inquired. Pear Hill, you ask? Kenom seemed surprised. It is located in Clapper Province, which is very far away from here. Are you planning to go there? Kenom had only known Zen for a few days. Now he was sure that Zen came from outside the source world, as he seemed to lack a lot of common sense about this world. Zen shook his head. He did intend to go to Pear Hill sooner or later, but not today. Kenom continued, consummate true gods like us don't have the qualifications to travel between provinces, unless we join a large sect of a provincial scale. A sect of a provincial scale? Zen repeated. Does Pear Hill count? Shaking his head, Kenom answered with a smile, it sure doesn't. For true gods, a sect like Pear Hill is a legendary force. A sect of a provincial scale is one that controls an entire province such as the Swordlight Palace. There was a look of yearning in Kenom's eyes when he spoke. So, does that mean that the Gracious Province is controlled by Swordlight Palace? Zen asked in curiosity. Wild Goose Pass is one of the exits of the source world. Thus, the Gracious Province doesn't allow itself to be controlled by any sect. The Swordlight Palace controls the 7-star province, which is next to the Gracious Province, elaborated Kenom. So how can I join Swordlight Palace? Zen asked with keen interest. Kenom was glad to see that he had Zen's attention on this matter. His eyes gleamed triumphantly. As a consummate true god, Kenom was a little weaker than Zen. Still, as a member of the source world, he had sharp eyes. Just like him, Zen was also a consummate true god, but Kenom could tell that Zen had mastered truth of godly way, which meant Zen had already been to Sea of Truth. Kenom had been trying hard to befriend him to take advantage of his strength. Kenom elucidated, to be honest, I have been longing to join Swordlight Palace all my life, but it's too difficult for people from Gracious Province to do so. The Swordlight Palace opens up places for recruits in Gracious Province every year, but it's almost impossible for warriors of Excellence City to snag a spot at any of these places. However, a month ago, we got some news. His expression became serious now. Some time ago, a stinger guard of Swordlight Palace died in one of the caves in the west of Cyan Brocade Plain. The Swordlight Palace sent word that anyone who could find the stinger guard's tomb and belongings would be qualified to join the Swordlight Palace. Since you're aware of this story, you must have tried to find it, right? Zen asked, intrigued by the story too. A wry smile appeared on Kenom's face. I did, of course. Half a month ago, I invited a few other consummate true gods of Excellence City to explore the cave with me. We ended up encountering a lot of trouble in that cave. The stinger guard has become an evil ghost in the tomb and even killed a consummate true god. Kenom, since you have brought it up, do you want me to go there with you? Zen asked with a sparkle in his eyes. By now Zen had gathered that Kenom must have approached him with a purpose, but he couldn't figure out what it was. Kenom nodded. Zen, although you haven't shown me your true strength, I know you have entered Sea of Truth before. Your soul of light must be far stronger than mine, and you should be able to take on the evil ghost. Kenom also had a soul of light, but he hadn't been to the Sea of Truth before, so his soul hadn't been tested by the Sea of Truth. Obviously, there was a huge gap between his and Zen's soul force. Zen chewed on this for a while and then nodded slightly. In that case, I'll go with you. Although he was now in the source world, a world full of powerful warriors, Zen believed that he would be able to take care of himself as long as they did not encounter other Shore Realm warriors. Kenom was pleased at Zen's decision. Great, I'll summon my buddies and we will set off tomorrow. In the early hours of the next morning, Kenom led Zen to the entrance of Excellence City. 3 consummate true gods had already gathered at the gate of the city. These 3 people looked very young, but Zen could see that they were 2 to 5,000 years old. Just like Kenelm, these true gods had never entered the sea of truth either. Kenelm made introductions and then asked one of them, "Where is Tanner?" One of them sighed and said, "After you took him there last time, he had been thinking about it all the time. He informed some people in the port. I don't know what benefit he promised them, but it seems a few people went there with him yesterday." Kenelm's expression changed dramatically. "He what? How could he do that? That traitor. The people he had recruited are the guards of the commercial groups who are recuperating in Excellence City. They are a strong bunch. I think even if they do find the Stinger guards' belongings, Tanner won't be the one getting them," the man sighed. "Well, let's go now." Kenelm's anxiety was high. These people had always dreamed of joining the Swordlight Palace. It was the only way for them to grow their cultivation base and move beyond the consummation of True God Realm. If they failed in joining the Swordlight Palace, they would never reach the other shore realm. Zen didn't say anything. He figured that Tanner might be one of Kenelm's friends, and it was common for people to betray their friends for benefits. However, he also understood that if he joined in the exploration of the cave of the Stinger Guard, it would become more complicated. Eventually, the five of them, including Zen, flew towards the west of Excellence City under Kenelm's leadership. Half a day later, Zen came upon a stretch of grassland. He had seen this plain in the scene that the earmouse had shown him before. It must be the Cyan Brocade Plain. Chapter 2573, A Blocker. Meanwhile, a gray compass appeared in Kenelm's hand as soon as they arrived in the Cyan Brocade Plain. Kenelm gave the compass a gentle pat, and the compass began to spin. Being true to its name, the Cyan Brocade Plain resembled a piece of green tapestry at first glance. Without any object as a reference, anyone could get lost in it. As a man from the Excellence City, Kenelm quickly found the way to the cave with the help of the compass. After an hour of traveling, he stopped in the middle of the plain. Releasing his spiritual sense, Zen noticed that there was a small pit at the bottom of the grass. Out of curiosity, he let his spiritual sense follow the pit and saw a cave. "Come on, let's go down the cave." Kenelm was in a hurry to go downwards. Knowing that his friend had decided to get ahead of him, he became extremely anxious. As soon as he finished speaking, he sprinted downwards. Zen, along with the other three consummate true gods, followed suit. The cave below the grass was so narrow that it was possible for only one person to get in and out of it. One by one, the 5 people went down and crawled onward this narrow entrance. After a few hundred feet down the passageway, a broad karst cave appeared. After entering the karst cave, Kenelm held the compass to see which way they should be heading. Then he said, "Follow me, over there." Walking a few steps along a path, Zen suddenly stopped and gave a slight frown. Walking in front of him, Kenelm turned his head and asked, "Zen, what's wrong?" Just behind Zen, the consummate true gods looked the exact same way. "Didn't your spiritual sense perceive it? Some things seem to be crawling over here," Zen replied. Whenever a consummate true god, just like them, explored a strange place, they would spread out their spiritual sense very vigilantly. This was what Zen was doing at this very moment, so were Kenelm and the others. To them, the spiritual sense was similar to another pair of their eyes. "I didn't sense anything." "Well, me neither." Then they looked around, and their faces were full of caution. Kenelm's face darkened, and he continued, "Are they using some kind of hiding skill?" "I think so." By using his spiritual sense, Zen could feel that the figures of those things were very blurry, like grass snakes or gray threads that appeared and disappeared, fluctuating. Whenever Zen and the others stopped, those invisible things also seemed to stop moving forward. Once hidden, they remained undetected, even by Zen. "Move on. Kenelm, please lead the way," spoke Zen. Moving forward, the 5 people continued to go deeper into the karst cave. The moment Zen took a single step forward, he could sense the movement again from the undetected creatures. Right at that moment, Zen didn't say anything and just silently stayed behind Kenelm, following him. After a couple of more steps, they were already deep into the karst cave. After a few hundred feet, the things sensed by Zen's spiritual sense also quickened all of a sudden. At the same time, they heard a rustling sound that came to surround them quickly. Now, it was not only Zen who felt them but also the 4 other warriors who were with him. What was strange about it was that although they heard so many crawling and strange noises, they were still unable to see them visually, nor by using their spiritual senses. "What are these things? Don't move. Stay put. We can't see them." As Zen noticed the nervous expressions of the 4 other warriors, his lips were pressed into a thin line. Although they were the aboriginal people of the source world, their endurance was really quite terrible, making them freak out by the tiniest of sounds and trouble. Just then, from the depths of the cave, a voice sounded saying, "You'd better not move." As soon as the voice trailed off, a light green figure emerged gently. A young man leaned on a corner of the cave and spoke faintly. Zen's eyebrows lifted at the sight of this young man. In reality, this young man was also a consummate true god, but he had already comprehended the truth of godly way. His hiding theurgy was created using the truth of cultivation nature. Zen was also able to hide himself by taking advantage of the truth of cultivation nature, but his hiding skill relied on the natural laws of the truth of cultivation nature, which was why it wasn't as good as this young man's. Suddenly, the young man gently waved his hand and the cave began to emit green light spots the size of a rice grain. But after the green light dissipated, what appeared were rice-sized ants. Interesting. No wonder these ants could avoid my spiritual senses perception. They also use the truth of cultivation nature, Zen said after observing, with the corner of his mouth curling up. Although Zen could still keep calm, it was far difficult for the other four to do the same. Meanwhile, all of their faces changed greatly as soon as they saw the black ants. "Noxious army ants, what do you want from us?" a consummate true god shouted as he feared for his life. The noxious army ant was a well-known poisonous insect in the Gracious province. If a true god was bitten by the insect, its poison could spread all over their body, making their body instantly decay, which would lead to a miserable death. Someone had said that a martial artist had to cut the area bitten by the noxious army ant within 3 seconds. Otherwise, they would definitely die. Obviously, the noxious army ant was a very deadly insect. How could they not panic when they found out that there were so many noxious army ants around them? As the young man waved his hand lightly, a wisp of green light emanated from the surface of the noxious army ants, which disappeared again from the crowd's eyes. At the same time, he said, "I don't want to do anything. Tanner has predicted that someone would explore this cave. That's why he asked me to stay here and guard it. If you are clever enough to leave, we can just pretend that this didn't happen. But if you take one more step forward. After all, this karst cave has such beautiful scenery, making it the perfect place to bury you." With his eyes filled with murderous intent, the young man threatened the group. Tanner. Kenom's eyes filled with furious resentment. Tanner, Kenom and the others had the same cultivation base, and they had a good relationship in the Excellence City. However, it was out of Kenom's expectation that Tanner took some strangers here, and that now he even wanted to block them outside. How could he not hate his own friend? Looking at Kenom's irritated eyes, Zen heaved a soft sigh in his heart. He sympathized because he knew that betrayal was one of the worst feelings in the world. "Go back, losers. After all, none of you are qualified to enter the Stinger Guard's tomb," the young man said impatiently as he waved his hand. Meanwhile, the other 3 consummate true gods already wanted to retreat. They knew that no matter how attractive the Stinger Guard's tomb was, it still wasn't worth losing their lives for. "So, Kenom, what shall we do? Shall we just go back?" one of them asked, waiting for an instruction. Kenom hesitated for a while as he thought that he might have underestimated Tanner's helpers. Although he had invited Zen, a consummate true god who had stepped into the sea of truth and had a soul of light that could subdue the evil spirit in the tomb, he still was not aware of how strong Zen was, nor did he expect too much from him. Kenom felt helpless at that moment. He nodded his head in frustration and accepted his friend's suggestion, for there was nothing more he could do. Just as he was about to instruct everyone to leave, Zen suddenly asked, "Kenom, do you know if the noxious army ants are afraid of fire?" Chapter 2574, Pulverized. Confused, Kenom didn't know why Zen asked such a question. All he knew was that the noxious army ants were fatal. The noxious army ants are terrifying not just because of their poison. In fact, they are incredibly fast, and they are not afraid of water or fire. Moreover, it's difficult to kill them with normal methods. Kenom sighed in dismay. "Thank you for taking the trouble of coming with us, Zen. For now, it's better if we just go back. It's not worthy to risk our lives here." However, Zen was still intrigued by the ants and continued to ask, "If these noxious army ants come to surround and attack us, will you guys be able to resist any of them?" Giving Zen a surprised glance, Kenom responded, "Well, it's already a given fact that it's difficult for us to kill them. However, we can still manage to keep some distance away from them." "Zen, you keep on asking some really weird questions. What do you want to do? Is it?" As Kenom's voice trailed off, Zen's gaze was already rested on the young man not far away. The young man was still leaning on the cave's wall waiting for them to leave. Apparently he had heard Zen's words, and a cold smile immediately appeared on his face. "If you want to die, then just tell me. I can send you." But before he could finish what he wanted to say, Zen already jumped up and flew towards him. When the young man saw that Zen was daring enough to dash towards him, the cold smile on his face suddenly became even wilder. He blew a gentle whistle, and the noxious army ants hiding on the surrounding walls of the cave immediately fell like raindrops, rushing towards Zen. Upon seeing Zen's move, Kenom was shocked. He cursed in his heart that Zen was being too impulsive and stupid, that he was not able to stop him. Even if they really wanted to take action, he should first rush to the man who controlled the noxious army ants as fast as the speed of light. However, Zen flew towards the young man so leisurely that Kenom could foresee that Zen would be bitten by the noxious army ants in an instant. Why was he courting death this way? At that point, it was evident that Kenom didn't know what Zen was intending to do. As a matter of fact, Zen feared that they could not resist the noxious army ants' attacks. If he pranced to reach the young man, then it was likely that most of them would be attracted to him. As for the deadly poison of the noxious army ants, it was not Zen's concern at all. One by one, the noxious army ants fell on Zen's body, reaching out their stings and stabbing them mercilessly into Zen's skin as they injected toxin into his body. When the noxious army ants injected the toxin into Zen's skin, a wisp of dark green aura suddenly appeared on Zen's skin, which spread all over his whole body in the blink of an eye. These noxious army ants actually pierced right through my skin. Moreover, the toxin spreads very fast. Zen's eyes flickered as the toxin seeped through his skin. However, as deadly and poisonous as the noxious army ants were, they were still unable to cause Zen any harm. As Zen was flying through the ants, his body gave a quick tremble. Normally, ordinary beasts would have been pulverized upon such an impact. However, tiny as they might seem, the small bodies of the noxious army ants were very strong. Zen's attempt just simply made the attached ants be shaken off his body, falling down to the ground unhurt. Meanwhile, the young man leaning on the cave wall shot a glance at Zen as if he was looking at a dead and cold corpse. I've seen a lot of stupid men in my life, but I've never seen anyone so stupid as to court death in this very pathetic way. This young man was so gifted at controlling various strange insects. Moreover, the truth of cultivation nature that he practiced was not something that most true gods could easily deal with. In fact, he could kill people without being noticed in many cases. He was tasked to scare several foolish people away from the place, but only this time, he didn't expect that there would be an idiot among them who would even insist on offering his life. Knowing how powerful and deadly the ants were, he assumed that Zen would be paralyzed, falling to the ground in a few seconds after being bitten. Moreover, his body would rot instantly, resulting in his death. The young man had already seen a lot of such miserable deaths. Phew, at that moment, Zen and the young man were separated by only over 1,000 feet. Nevertheless, Zen managed to cross the distance in an instant, although he had knowingly restrained his speed. Stopping in front of the young man, he calmly asked, "Are you waiting for the poison to kill me?" Afterwards, a dark green aura emerged on Zen's face little by little, indicating that the toxin of the noxious army ants was already spreading fast and rampaging within his body. But when he saw that Zen was still full of vigor and vitality, the young man got a little confused. What's happening? Why is he still alive? Thought the young man. What he saw did not match what he knew about the ant's toxin. To him, Zen was obviously poisoned, but he was not entirely affected by the poison at all. How could this be possible? Ah, you don't need to wait for that to happen. I'm sure that you will die earlier than me. Zen smiled, and the aura within his body burst out unexpectedly. All of a sudden, there was a flash of cold light in his hand, and a long and shiny sword appeared on it. Taking advantage of this moment, he had taken the initiative to launch an attack. The young man was disoriented at the sight in front of him. He was taken aback when he saw that Zen was already slashing in front of him. And in a snap, there was a flash of green light, and he completely disappeared into thin air. However, the young man's skill of using the truth of cultivation nature was deemed to be more powerful than that of Zen's. After all, Zen had not practiced any cultivation method to exert the truth of godly way so far. If this young man hid himself in a corner and kept still, then Zen would not be able to detect him at all. However, as long as the young man moved, Zen would be able to find some traces of him and locate him by using his spiritual sense. Whoosh! Zen swung his sword, and a mark of a deep groove was left on the cave's wall. After hiding, the young man ingeniously rushed to the depths of the cave at an incredible speed. Zen's mouth gave a little smirk as he activated the truth of cultivation nature. With this skill, his body immediately became casual and agile, similar to that of a leaf that had just fallen from a tree. He appeared to be drifting aimlessly, but the truth was that he was closely following the young man's footsteps as carefully as he could. Crack, as he was drifting through the cave, Zen waved his sword. And every time he slashed the sword, a green light would flash in front of him. Then he would move dozens of feet further in the cave and thrust the sword again. Every time Zen's sword waved, sounds of a metallic collision could be heard as if his sword hit a solid shield. Beyond this endeavor, Zen kept his calm and proceeded with caution. He swung his sword for the 8th time when suddenly, the sound of metal collision was put to an end. He looked at his sword and noticed that it was nailed to the cave's wall. Buzz! In a blink of an eye, a ball of green light materialized in front of the long sword, soon followed by the appearance of the young man. The young man held a huge bug shell on his hand. This shell was so durable that it was able to withstand and even resist Zen's sword strikes. After unleashing 90% of his strength, Zen finally pierced the bug shell directly, causing the sword to stab into the young man's chest. Why aren't you afraid of the noxious army ant's poison?" asked the young man as he stared at Zen with utmost disbelief. At that moment, Zen's face was still spiked with a dark green color. He was clearly poisoned, but it was still a mystery as to why he remained unscathed. "I am not afraid of the noxious army ant's poison, nor any other poison you can name of. If you don't believe, you can try the scorpion sting in your hand," Zen said faintly. The young man looked at his hand with a worried face and shot a glance back at Zen again. In his right hand was a scorpion sting from the doomed scorpion's tail. Being more poisonous than the noxious army ants, this scorpion sting was his last resort if he still wanted to live. He had turned the tables around as he narrowly escaped from death several times with the scorpion sting's help. This time, however, he didn't expect that Zen would expose the secret of this lifesaver. Desperate, the young man turned his right hand over and deliberately shot the scorpion sting at Zen. But before the poison could reach Zen, he twisted his sword and unleashed a vigorous force, leaving the young man pulverized to bits. "This cave boasts such wonderful scenery, and is indeed the perfect place to bury you," Zen said, shaking his head. Chapter 2575, a tomb containing the personal effects of the deceased. The instant the young man was killed by Zen, every single noxious army ant in the cave threw off his control over them. They crawled toward the narrow gaps in the walls of the cave. The 4 consummate true gods looked nervous, as they stood close to each other, forming a circle, and used several thurges for protection. They were fearful of hidden noxious army ants. In a few seconds, the noxious army ants rushed away in every direction and disappeared. They turned to look for Zen, and couldn't hide their shock at what he had done. They had feared the young man and his total control and manipulation of the noxious army ants, but Zen had killed him instantly, without any trouble. Kenom did not doubt that Zen was stronger than him and his companions, for he had been to the Sea of Truth before. But his opponent who controlled the noxious army ants had also been a consummate true god and entered the Sea of Truth. He and Zen should have been evenly matched. Since Zen had killed him in an instant, did that mean that Zen was far stronger than they realized? Or, perhaps the young man had underestimated Zen, and had accidentally left an opening for Zen to defeat him. Kenom and his 3 companions thought the latter was more believable. They thought maybe Zen and his opponent had been equally powerful, and the young man had just been lax and caught off guard. It was difficult for them to accept that the strengths of 2 consummate true gods could be so different. All 4 of them were of the same cultivation level, and they had been in Excellence City for a long time. They had not seen such a disparity in power before. "Be careful, there may still be some noxious army ants that are just hiding. We must still keep away from the ground and protect our heads." Kenom kicked off the ground, and rose into the air. The noxious army ants had lost their master as soon as Zen killed the young man. However, they were still very dangerous and aggressive, and it would be wise for them to stay cautious. Kenom and the other 3 flew towards Zen, keeping a sharp lookout for any lingering noxious army ants. "Zen, are you all right?" Kenom asked. He saw that Zen's face looked green, and felt a trace of worry. "We do have some regular antidotes with us. But the poison of the noxious army ant is ferocious and unlike any other." Kenom trailed off. He suddenly realized something. Zen's face was green, which meant he had been bitten. The poison of the noxious army ant was notorious for its fierceness and the quickness with which it killed its victims. How could Zen still be standing? "It doesn't matter. This poison can't hurt me," Zen said calmly, waving his hand. "Is Zen impervious to the poison of the noxious army ants?" Kenom and the others exchanged stunned glances. Kenom looked at the questioning faces of his companions. He knew they were wondering where he had found the strange and powerful Zen. Zen went to the young man and pulled out his sword. He also took the space ring on his finger. Then he flicked his hand, and the dead body burned to ashes. Zen did not know whom he had killed, or where he had come from. He did not want to leave any evidence of what had happened to him. He did not want any more trouble. After all, this was not the divine land. Especially because Zen was alone, he needed to be more careful than usual. As the others watched, he closed his eyes, focused, and forced the poison out of his body. Then he took a few steps forward, peering into the depths of the cave. How deep is this cave? It's not very deep. The distance between here and our destination is more than 10,000 feet at the most, Kenom answered. He couldn't hide the note of hope in his voice. He had been thinking of giving up, but this feat that Zen accomplished led Kenom to place greater trust in his strength and ability. Kenom and his companions were all consummate true gods, top figures in Excellent City, and yet none of them wanted to stay any longer in this small space. They wanted to seize this opportunity to move to some larger sect. Let's go, Zen said, and the others nodded. The 5 of them moved forward, into the depths of the cave. It was getting wider and wider. In less than a minute, they had covered a distance of over 10,000 feet. There was a curved corner coming up ahead. They turned the corner just as a strange sound emanated from the cave, almost like a scream. An energy wave spilled towards them, almost like the energy of an unleashed soul. They heard a man shouting, "Dang it! This ghost has become too powerful." The man's voice brought a look of dark recognition to the faces of Kenom and his 3 friends. "It's Tanner's voice," he said. Zen moved forward, eager to see what was happening. The cave was just as Kenom had described. It was not large. Once past the corner, they reached the end of the passage, which was a dead-end cavern. They gazed around. Near the far wall of the cave, a cyan sword had been plunged into the ground. Clothes, boots, and items had been placed behind the sword. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, indicating how long they had lain here undisturbed. This was the tomb that Kenom had told them about. Some powerful people, for various reasons, ended up losing their bodies. As a last resort, before they died, they would use the final remnants of their strength to set up their own tombs, containing their personal effects. Ahahaha, their attention was drawn by the specter behind the tomb. A huge soul was suspended in midair, struggling madly. Zen watched the soul with some fascination. So this was the ghost mentioned by Kenom. He wondered what this stinger guard had experienced, why he had been unable to keep his body when he died, and why his soul had become a ghost. The twisting, ferocious ghost was bound by twin chains of flames. 2 consummate true gods stood on either side of the ghost, holding on to the other ends of the chains. They wore identical expressions of intense focus. They were clearly experienced in restraining souls, and continued to hold down the ghost who thrashed in the air above them, preventing him from escaping. 3 more consummate true gods stood near the chain keepers. A handsome man in a purple silk robe seemed to be their leader. And the one beside him, wearing a black hat, was none other than Tanner. When Zen and the others entered, the men in the cave immediately turned towards them. Tanner saw Kenom and looked astonished. "Kenom, how did you get in here?" The young man in purple stared at the intruders. He had asked one of his men, who was strong and capable, to guard the entrance of the cave. He would have blocked these 5 from coming in, so how had they made it past him? Kenom gave Tanner a look of hatred. Sneering, he said, "I'm here to take what belongs to me." "I underestimated your shamelessness, Tanner. I didn't expect you to bring outsiders here." Despite Kenom's words, Tanner didn't show any sign of guilt. In fact, he looked just as angry as Kenom. He said, "You are the outsiders here. Have you come to steal the personal belongings of the Stinger Guard? You must reconsider what you are willing to do. It is never wise to take something that doesn't belong to you. Steal from the wrong person, and you will be courting death." As Tanner spoke, Kenom's face turned redder and redder. He could barely contain his rage. The man in purple frowned at Kenom, Zen, and the others. "Where is Guido? Didn't you meet him, guarding the entrance of the cave?" Zen smiled faintly. He said, "We met no one. Maybe he found the cave too stuffy, and left for a moment to get some fresh air." "Nonsense," said the man in purple. He narrowed his eyes at Zen. Guido was the most powerful and capable among his men, and he was dependable, too. He would not have left at such an important time. Something must have happened to him. The man in purple looked at Zen's bland expression. What had they done to Guido? Anger flashed in his eyes. Chapter 2576, A Trap. Just then, the ferocious ghost bound by the fire chains let out another roar. Ahaha! The ghost emitted a strong force of soul that made the 2 chains binding it vibrate. The 2 consummate true gods had identical looks of tension on their faces. They tightly gripped the chains in their hands, and the flames on the 2 chains blazed even stronger. Oh no, Master Alan, the ghost's soul force is growing stronger. The flaming sun chains probably cannot hold it. The faces of the two consummate true gods lost their color. In the beginning, the soul force of the ghost was relatively weak. The two consummate true gods had a talent for dealing with all sorts of evil spirits, so they had thought that they would be able to capture the ghost. They never expected the ghost's soul force to increase continuously. Its strength far exceeded their expectations. For now, the ghost was still bound by flaming sun chains. If it managed to break free from the chains, the consequences would be unimaginable. Hearing this, Alan, the purple-robed man, looked grim. He cast a glance at the ghost in midair and gave an order, "Artie, go and execute the intruders. I'll subdue the ghost myself." After issuing his command, he stretched out his hand and tapped gently. 2 jade hooks appeared. He leapt high and threw the jade hooks toward the ghost. Following Alan's orders, Artie took out a long golden stick and addressed the people who broke in. "Guido is my brother. I don't know how you got in here, but I hope you can tell me where he is. In return, I will leave your corpses intact." Upon hearing his menacing words, Kenom and his companions took some steps back. Actually, the situation had been completely out of the control since they entered the cave. For Kenom and the other consummate true gods, this was nothing but a thrilling, somewhat dangerous adventure. However, the strength of the group brought here by Tanner was completely beyond what they expected, and the soul force released by the ghost was even more terrifying. If Kenom had known that the ghost would become this powerful, then he might have eschewed the idea altogether. Kenom and the others had retreated, but Zen hadn't. No, 9527's voice played in his head, "These people cannot subdue the ghost. They'll all die here." "Why?" Zen asked. Zen felt strongly threatened by the soul force released by the ghost, but Alan seemed confident that he could subdue it. The stinger guard who arranged this tomb was evil, number 9527 explained. He didn't want his belongings to be destroyed, so he deliberately set up this array to turn a strand of his soul into a ghost. This ghost devours the souls of living people to improve his strength. Many people must have stumbled into this cave in the past few years, but very few of them have made it out alive. I'm afraid the ghost's strength can even become several times stronger. Hearing these words, Zen was taken aback, and he ended up second-guessing his ability to take down the ghost. If the spirit's power became several times stronger, then he might not be able to fight back. "It means that this cave is not a tomb, but a trap to improve the ghost's cultivation," said number 9527 with finality. Seeing Zen standing still and looking behind him, Artie assumed that the other man did not take him seriously. His face was filled with anger. "Where is Guido?" he demanded. "Answer me." As soon as he uttered these words, he transformed into a golden flash of light and flew toward Zen, leaving a golden shadow inside the cave. He waved his long golden stick and brandished it at Zen's head. "Zen, watch out." Kenom was shocked at what he saw. He didn't know why Zen was in a daze at such a crucial moment. Phew, Artie dropped his stick. The golden stick shadow was mixed with some blue space fragments, which was a result of the truth of void destruction. The incredible power contained in the strike was enough to destroy anything it touched. Seeing the long golden stick coming at him, Zen reached out his right hand and grasped it tightly with a thud. With several snaps, the space fragments around the long golden stick slashed at Zen's arm. Only some beams of golden light touched his arm, and it was not harmed in the slightest. When Zen was in the divine land, his strength already far exceeded that of an ordinary consummate true god. He was able to fight a holy being head-on. Afterwards, with the power of the original will of the divine land at his disposal, even the masters at the other shore realm were no match for him. After leaving the divine land, he could not use the power of the original will and the supreme treasures of belief. However, a consummate true god like Artie was still no match for him. Artie scoffed at Zen's foolish behavior inwardly. "Doesn't he know that my powerful strike can cut him into pieces? He dared to grab my stick with his bare hand. What a fool!" He was astounded to see Zen successfully take his stick into his hand unharmed. Artie's eyes widened in shock. He could not believe that someone at the same cultivation level as him could take his full blow with a bare hand. Not even Alan could do that. He raised his hands and tried to reclaim the long stick back from Zen's hand. However, Zen seemed to be grasping it casually, and the long stick was firmly stuck to his hand and would not budge. Zen glanced at Artie indifferently and raised the hand that was holding the long stick. Before Artie could let go, his body was lifted up by the long stick and was sent flying over 100 feet before smashing into the wall of the cave. Kenom and his companions stared in shock, eyes wide, at what they had witnessed. Kenom finally realized that Zen had defeated Guido not because of sheer luck or the other's flaws. His strength was far beyond that of the other consummate true gods at his cultivation level. Zen came from a land outside of the source world. Was he a talent of a great race in the chaos? Kenom's mind came up with a guess. Not far away, the purple-robed man had his 2 jade hooks firmly locked to the ghost. The jade hooks seemed to be specifically used to suppress evil spirits. After the ghost was hooked, it issued hissing sounds, as if the soul was being burned. The ghost moaned and seemed to choke out its last gasp. You may be wrong. He appears to have subdued the ghost, Zen said. I was mistaken, number 9527 asked, surprised. That's impossible. Although I don't know how the tomb and its traps are arranged, I, as a soul, am more sensitive about such things than you. It calmly proceeded to instruct Zen, look at the sword on the tomb. Zen's gaze was once again focused on the cyan sword. He saw a light flicker across the sword, and the moribund ghost suddenly swelled up. Just as number 9527 had speculated, a soul force that was more than 4 or 5 times stronger burst forth from the ghost. Chapter 2577, To Destroy the Tomb. The soul force of the ghost continued to grow. As it increased gradually, so did its strength. Shortly after, it became as powerful as a warrior at the other shore realm. The fierce soul aura of the ghost surged violently throughout the cave, causing people to tremble in fear. Clap, clap, the 2 fire chains holding the ghost collapsed in an instant. Its power was so terrifying that it dragged the 2 consummate true gods across the ground like rag dolls. Showing no signs of mercy, it threw them in its mouth and broke their necks. The man in purple watched all this unravel in horror. His face changed color dramatically. He gently twisted his body in the air and moved backward in an attempt to retreat. Despite the intense atmosphere, the man in purple refused to panic. He remained calm and composed. It came as no surprise since he came from a noble clan. However, the ghost had no intention of letting him go. It wanted to feed on anything that moved. The ghost began charging towards the man at an alarming speed. It attempted to block the man's path by spreading its arms wide, leaving him nowhere to go. As he was cornered, the man's expression turned serious. He stared at the ghost with no hint of fear in his eyes. And then, a small seed exploded above his head. The latent Thurgi. The man was a descendant of a large clan in the Gracious province. His clan had made sure he remained unscathed. For his protection, they had planted the latent Thurgi in case his life was ever in danger and he needed to make a quick escape. As the seed exploded, a shadow of a beautiful woman emerged from it. She curled her body and began to sing a strange song. It was like she was protecting the man from the ghost. As the woman sang, the sound waves surrounded the man's head like ripples. They continued to grow till they enveloped the man in the shape of a sphere with a radius of 100 feet. The sphere acted as an impenetrable force field for him, keeping him away from harm. The ghost was ferocious and enraged. It continued its attempts to break through the sphere of sound. Every blow of the ghost formed waves on the sphere but failed to weaken it. It was almost invincible. The man in purple knew the sphere wouldn't hold for long, it came with a time limit. The latent Thurgi would soon wear off. He knew he had to act fast. The internal momentum began to spread out of his body as he attempted to perform the grand teleportation technique in hopes of escaping from this place. But, the moment the space fluctuation condensed before him, the ghost let out a loud cry. The cry was so loud that it pierced through everyone's souls, and even Zen felt dizzy. The people standing behind him screamed in agony as they could not endure it. Shortly after, the people rolled their eyes and collapsed on the ground. They covered their ears desperately but it was to no avail. It felt like their ears were bleeding from the sharp noise. The man in purple remained in the clutches of the ghost as it roared out. The sphere of sound was not able to block out the cries of the ghost, and the man screamed out in pain from the shrieking noise. When the noise reached towards his soul, a soul weapon planted in his chest shattered into pieces from the impact. Suddenly, the space channel he just formed scattered everywhere. The man in purple realized the ghost had bested him. His vision began to blur as his head felt dizzy from the aftereffects of the cry. Even so, he didn't give up. He gritted his teeth and continued to perform the grand teleportation technique. However, when the space channel began to form again, the ghost let out another sharp cry. This time, the man's head hung loosely from his neck, he had passed out. The shadow of the woman above his head remained, and she continued to sing for his protection. But the latent Thurgi could only be used once and it only lasted for a short while. Not long after, the shadow of the woman began getting dimmer and dimmer. Her tone of singing got lower and lower, till she was almost inaudible. Once the effects of the latent Thurgi wore off, the man would be left vulnerable and at the mercy of the ghost. At this moment, No 9527's voice resounded in Zen's mind, it's time to make a move. With Zen's current soul, he was unable to withstand the ghost. If it weren't for No 9527's existence, he would have already left. Number 9527 continued to guide Zen from his mind. It had told him that although the ghost was fierce, it relied on soul force that came from the tomb. If the tomb was destroyed, the ghost would perish along with it. Zen listened intently at No 9527's words. He then nodded to himself and began descending towards the tomb. As he approached the tomb, a sharp sword radiance appeared to emit from the cyan sword. The sword radiance was as bright as sunlight flickering at the hint of dawn. It carried immense power and dashed toward Zen's head. It's the truth of eternal sword intent. Zen's eyes widened as he stared at it with wonder. There was no way that the man in purple and his companions did not see the tomb. They had also initially planned on knocking down the tomb. However, it turned out to be an extremely powerful array, which was why they attempted to eliminate the ghost instead. As a warrior at the other shore realm, the Stinger Guard had been dead for countless years. The truth of eternal sword intent hidden in the cyan sword grew weak over time. Even today, the sword intent urged by the truth of eternal sword intent still couldn't be underestimated. It held overwhelming power within it. As Zen flew close to the surface, he suddenly clapped his hands on the ground and turned his body to avoid the sword radiance. At the same time, the soaring snake sword appeared in his hand. Swish! Wei's blending strike, Zen exclaimed as he slashed at the sword radiance released from the cyan sword with the Wei's blending strike, which made his sword also emit sword radiance. The impact of the two rays of sword radiance clashing against each other was strong and loud. The sword radiance that burst out from their contact was as bright as the sun. With the strong surges of energy spreading far and wide, Zen had no choice but to retreat and rush up again once the energy dissipated. Just as Zen began charging towards the tomb for another attempt, the woman singing above the man's head disappeared. The moment she left, the sphere of sound faded along with it. Without wasting a moment, the ghost swallowed the man whole. The noise coming from the tomb alerted the ghost and it turned its attention towards Zen. It glared at him from a distance and watched him charge towards the tomb in an attempt to smash it. The ghost let out a wild scream. The tomb was its home and it was not going to allow anyone to touch it. As it screamed sharply, it quickly rushed towards Zen. It used its screams to destabilize Zen till it reached him. The loud sound of shrieks made Zen's soul tremble as it weakened. He struggled to charge forward, trying his best to ignore it. It was not hard for him to beat ferocious beasts. But in this case, the ghost was all soul. It proved more challenging for him since his soul of light was far weaker compared to his body. He did not want to imagine the consequences of being caught by the ghost. He was in no position to give up either. He kept advancing despite the approaching threat. At this moment, Zen exerted all his remaining strength into performing the truth of cultivation nature. He moved as gracefully as a swallow flying into the dense forest, dodging the sword radiance released by the cyan sword from time to time. Swish, swish, swish. As the cyan sword drew closer to him, a green light flickered on the surface of the ancient sword. A dozen of rays of sword radiance spread out in all directions, quickly turning into a net of the sword to envelop Zen's body. As the net rushed to trap him and the ghost chased after him, Zen became confused. He ultimately lost his balance while twisting his body, causing him to smash into the net. Ah! Zen felt a sting of pain as he supported his right shoulder with his left arm. He groaned in pain and struggled to get back on his feet. There was a deep wound on Zen's right shoulder all the way to his back. Blood spilled out from his wound as he stumbled to maintain his balance. He looked ahead with a pained expression to see that the tomb was right in front of him. It was a small price to pay to get to his destination. Chapter 2578, Cleaning Up. Without hesitation, Zen had already grabbed the handle of the cyan sword with his left hand. As he held the sword handle tightly in his fingers, a repulsive force began to spread out from it. Zen was being so careless that he nearly let the sword slip out of his hand. As he activated the strength source, his left hand firmly gripped the sword, like an iron clamp. As he performed this action, Zen roared in his mind, "It's your turn to make a move." The sclerite on Zen's chest flashed lightly, and number 9527 entered the long sword at once. Ha ha! The ghost followed closely behind, rushing toward Zen as quickly as it could. Beneath the terrifying and evil pressure coming from the soul's aura, Zen could hardly breathe. Simultaneously, Zen had been forced into a corner, and there was almost no way out. Even if he used the grand teleportation, he knew he'd still be interrupted by the ghost. The scene of how the man in purple's life ended was still very fresh in his mind. If number 9527 was incapable of dealing with the cyan sword, Zen's life would probably end in the same way. He looked very nervous, and with absolute reason. Ahu! As the ghost howled, its dark brown arms extended toward Zen in an attempt to grab him, giving no forewarning whatsoever. Zen suddenly realized that the repulsive force emitting from the sword handle had disappeared, and the ghost's body had also frozen in midair, completely motionlessly. There were certain, rather specific reasons for the formation of most evil ghosts. The main reason was that people's souls contained both obsession and hatred, which intertwined with each other, causing the remnant souls to lose themselves and become abnormally vicious. Once the obsession disappeared, however, the evil ghosts would lose their meaning of existence. Number 9527 understood the reason why this ghost was formed, which was also why it let Zen take the risk. As soon as it entered the cyan sword and wiped off the Stinger Guard's obsession, the ghost's ferocious aura dissipated in an instant. The originally fierce and evil ghost actually transformed itself into a pure soul force. The hazel aura dispersed in all directions at once. What are you doing? It has swallowed countless souls. Its soul force is strong and pure. Its effect is even better than that of the soul pills. Absorb it quickly, number 9527 urged. It wasn't until Zen saw the soul force flowing in all directions that he realized its genuine value. With a flash of his eyes, his soul transformed into tentacles and he spread them outward, beginning to absorb the soul force around him. In the matter of just a few seconds, Zen had absorbed all of the pure soul force. Because the soul force was extremely pure, it didn't reject in the slightest Zen's soul, quickly making his soul of light even stronger. After absorbing the soul force, Zen immediately felt freshened. Even his ears and eyes became more sensitive. His senses had peaked. Just moments ago, everything was so dangerous. If you couldn't get rid of the cyan sword's obsession, I might just have died here today, Zen said. How is that even possible? It's just a remnant soul from another shore realm warrior, number 9527 grumbled in a disdainful tone. Zen smiled helplessly. It was easy for it to say that, sure, but breaking the obsession was much more complicated than it was making it sound. He held the cyan sword confidently in his hand and studied it carefully. He turned the weapon over and over again, observing its every angle. It was a good sword, but it seemed to have eroded over time and thus had little value to Zen. Then, he checked the clothes in the tomb. As he flipped through the clothes, an octagonal copper sheet dropped to the floor. The copper sheet was about the size of a palm. It looked ordinary, but Zen picked it up in his hand immediately in order to get a closer look. The small, fine lines in the middle of the copper sheet extended to all directions, seemingly following some unknown rule. Zen observed the small copper-colored sheet for a long while and still, he remained clueless. There was nothing else in the tomb. Aside from some clothes, there was only the small copper sheet that was kept here. Zen could only assume that it should have some kind of origin, and therefore he put it into his space ring. It was at that point that Zen looked at the three corpses lying on the ground not far away. With only a light move of his body, he took the things stored in their Sumeru spaces. Although Zen had countless divine crystals with him, he knew he couldn't solve everything with them. If he could find something useful from the corpses, he might save himself a little trouble. In addition to these three corpses, Zen had also knocked Artie out, who was now equally lying on the ground, half dead. And Tanner, the warrior who attracted the man in purple to come here, had passed out due to the roar from the ghost in the tomb, lying motionless on the ground. He would leave these two people to Kenelm, letting him decide their fate instead. When he finished all the things he needed to do, he awakened Kenelm and all the others. The ghost's roar in the graveyard contained powerful soul attacks. Although they had the souls of light, they were far from capable of resisting soul attacks of that level. They'd waken up now, but they still held their heads with their hands and looked miserable for a while. Kenelm was the first of the group to recover. When he opened his eyes and saw the scene in the cave, he was shocked. Is that ghost in the tomb really dead? He asked. Zen nodded silently. Man, I thought I was doomed. Surprise was written all over his face. Did you kill the ghost, Zen? Zen shook his head in denial. I don't have the ability to kill it. A few moments ago, the man in purple activated the latent theurgy before he died, which in turn, severely injured the ghost. The ghost then killed him. The truth didn't matter now. No one had seen what had happened just before, and Zen naturally wouldn't admit that it was him who killed the ghost. With such a powerful latent theurgy, the man in purple must have an extraordinary background, said Kenelm, with a cautious look on his face. Although the Gracious Province was a remote place, Kenelm couldn't afford to offend any of the big clans. If the big clans were to find out about what happened today, they would be in deep trouble. We have no choice but to dispose of the bodies and get rid of the evidence, said one of Kenom's friends. Although they weren't strong enough, they were all clear-minded. Cleaning everything up and wiping the traces down were a means of survival. And Tanner must also die. As Kenom glanced at Tanner, who was lying on the ground, flames of anger burned in his eyes. All the things that had happened were caused by him. He naturally had to vent his anger on him, it was to be expected. After Kenom ended Tanner's life and someone else killed Artie, they put all the corpses together and burned them to ashes. At once, their gazes fell on the cyan sword. After the death of any Stinger guard of the Swordlight Palace, if anyone packs their effects and returns them to the Swordlight Palace, they could obtain the qualification for joining the Swordlight Palace. Let's take these belongings and long sword back to the Excellent City and report to the Swordlight Palace, said Kenom eagerly. Although he listened to the others speak, Zen didn't say anything. Before coming here, he had heard Kenom say such things. That said though, he was suspicious of this rumor. If this Swordlight Palace really was some famous force, how could they use this method for selecting disciples to join them? Chapter 2579, The Secret of the Copper Sheet. Doubts continued to linger inside Zen's mind. However, he didn't say anything when he saw how pleased Kenom and the others were. After all, they had worked hard to get the tomb. The last thing Zen wanted was to pour cold water on them. Additionally, he didn't know much about the Source World. Perhaps the Swordlight Palace had truly set such a weird kind of rule. Afterward, Kenom immediately collected the belongings of the Stinger Guard. Then, they left the underground cave and hurriedly returned to the Excellent City. Later that day, Kenom hosted a fantastic banquet at the biggest restaurant in the Excellent City. Zen had already made up his mind that he would refuse to join the banquet. However, Kenom's kind words changed his mind as he finally accepted the invitation. I have entrusted a caravan to send the news about the tomb to the Swordlight Palace. With their great efficiency, they'll certainly complete the task almost immediately. I believe that it won't take long before they come to the Excellent City. Kenom raised his cup as a sign of respect. Afterward, he looked at Zen with sincere eyes. If it hadn't been for you, we would not have been able to enter that cave. Thank you very much. After he said such kind remarks, Kenom pulled his cup towards his mouth and gulped the wine. An appreciative smile was revealed in Zen's face as he followed Kenom's toast. After the toast, a friend of Kenom said in a curious tone, I really want to know the star class of the owner of the tomb. The Stinger Guards were similar to the 9 Li Guards and the Yellow Emperor Guards. However, the Swordlight Palace was still inferior to the super forces like the Bering race and the 9 Li race. Is it really that important? Zen asked curiously. With creased eyebrows, he looked at the speaker with confusion. Almost immediately, Kenom blinked his eyes and answered seriously, of course it is. If the owner of the tomb was a 1-star Stinger Guard, his belongings can be exchanged for a place in the Swordlight Palace. If he was a 2-star Stinger Guard, that means we can have 2 places. Moreover, if he was a 5-star Stinger Guard. The eyes of the audience lit up as they heard the remarks from Kenom. They were already aware of the rules of the Swordlight Palace. The rewards from the rules were the main reason why they risked their lives to follow Kenom in search of the tomb. That was an opportunity they couldn't miss. They were currently consummate true gods. If they could join the Swordlight Palace, their future would definitely be bright. With the abundant resources of the Swordlight Palace, it would be possible for them to enter the Sea of Truth and reach the other shore realm. Nonetheless, Zen maintained his composure and remained calm. Truth to be told, he wasn't really interested in the Swordlight Palace. In his long adventure in the Divine Land, he had already met the powerhouses at the other shore realm like Timotheus and Emily. Even with their enhanced strength, Zen didn't think they were that big of a deal. Moreover, he had already stepped into the Sea of Truth. Therefore, the resources of the Swordlight Palace didn't pique his interest. After the banquet, Zen returned to the house arranged by Kenom. With a wave of his hand, he cast an enchanted barrier to separate himself from the outside world. After he was sure that he couldn't be disturbed or spied on, Zen took out a few space rings that previously belonged to Alan and his men. Kenom and his companions knew that Zen had taken away those rings, but they said nothing. If it wasn't for Zen's help, they wouldn't have succeeded. Therefore, they thought the several space rings were rightfully his rewards. It took a while, but Zen eventually sorted out all the things in the space rings. The treasures of Alan's men were all very ordinary. They only had 20 divine crystals in total. Other people might view such loot as a large fortune, but Zen wasn't impressed by it. However, Alan's space ring had several extraordinary objects. A sword as thin as a cicada's wings was one of the treasures. When the sword was pulled out, a tinge of cold air was emitted, which was about to condense into something. Although Zen possessed the soaring snake sword, he couldn't use it most of the time. Alan's sword would definitely be a fine replacement for the time being. In addition to the majestic sword, Zen had also found some special magic weapons and over 1,000 divine crystals. Compared to Zen's wealth, such a loot was already too common to mention. However, Alan was already rich compared to the consummate true gods of his level. Finally, Zen took out the octagonal copper sheet. With curious eyes, he studied it carefully. After a while, he asked with creased eyebrows, "Number 9527, do you know what it is?" "No, sorry, I don't know what that is," answered number 9527 almost immediately. Although it knew many secrets and information that most people did not know, it still had its limits. It was rather impossible for it to know everything since the world was very complicated. Without a useful answer from No. 9527, Zen's curiosity heightened. With caution, he put his finger on the surface of the copper sheet. Then, he gently tapped his fingertip. A drop of blood immediately dripped and quickly slipped down. However, he still didn't find anything unusual. Afterward, he channeled the internal momentum onto the lines of the copper sheet. Nonetheless, the copper sheet remained unresponsive. After he thought for a while, an idea brightened up Zen's mind. With a smirk on his face, he took out a divine crystal. The divine crystals were used to feed the other shore tokens. Zen learned such a technique when he was in the divine land. Since the true gods didn't have the other shore tokens, the divine crystals could only be used as a currency in trades. Zen put the divine crystal in front of him. Afterward, he grabbed it with 2 fingers and pinched it gently. With a click, blue energy flowed out of it like water. It might be a waste to use the divine crystal that way. However, out of mere curiosity, Zen was more than willing to try it. When the blue energy flowed on the copper sheet, it was immediately absorbed by the symmetrical lines on the sheet's surface. As he witnessed the absorption of the blue energy, Zen couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. It seemed that his hunch was correct. Buzz! A slight tremble of the copper sheet separated the lines from its surface. Afterward, the lines constantly moved to form an extremely complicated map. In the center of the map was a golden mark which looked like a Sanskrit word. What map is this? Where is this? Why is there a golden Sanskrit word in it? There was a strange expression in Zen's eyes. Confusion seemed to overwhelm him. With sharp eyes, Zen carefully studied the map. After some time, he finally asked, "Number 9527, do you know where this map?" "No, I don't," number 9527 replied decidedly even before Zen could finish his words. Disappointment enveloped Zen as he pursed his lips. It seemed that he had to figure out the origin of the octagonal copper sheet by himself. He didn't know what the golden Sanskrit word meant, but he could turn to his son for help. Jeffrey was still in his inner world, and he should be able to figure out the meaning of the golden Sanskrit word. He had to put the copper sheet into his inner world and ask Jeffrey to study it. 2 days later, a silver flying ship suddenly streaked through the dark sky and appeared in the air above the excellent city. It scanned the area and checked the direction before it berthed at a dock next to the East Court. Click! An old man in a fur robe appeared from the ship. A furious aura enveloped him as he came down from the ship. His face was darkened with anger. A guard behind the old man came forward and saluted. With a respectful voice, he said, "Master Baber, although the excellent city is a remote and small city, the people and their relationships are complex here. It is difficult to find Master Alan." When the old man heard Alan's name, pain appeared in his eyes. His eyelids trembled a few times as his confusion seemed to settle. After a while, he said, "Go and buy news from the Mice League. We have to find this murderer by any means." Chapter 2580, Revenge. The guard's eyes widened, he couldn't hide his surprise at the old man's words. "Master Baber, is it not better if we go to the cyan brocade plain first?" The Mice League did not carry a good reputation in the source world. It was rare for anyone to buy news from the Mice League, only if they were left with no choice. Moreover, the old man Baberchi already had the location where his grandson died. It was more logical to investigate there first. Baberchi's nostrils flared, he was very anxious to get revenge. However, the words of the guard made sense. Swallowing his anger, he said, "Okay. Let's go to the cyan brocade plain first." Whoosh! They hastily took their leave. Baberchi chose to pass through Excellence City directly. As he flew past the Excellence City, he didn't even try to restrain his aura. A fierce killing intent permeated the atmosphere of the whole city, attracting the attention of the divine citizens living there. What a powerful other shore realm warrior. He is so aggressive. Will something bad happen to the excellent city? Don't worry, even if the powerful warrior were to do something to the city, I'm sure our city lord will protect us. Although many other shore realm warriors would visit the excellent city, the vast majority of them would stay in the East Port. Seldom did they stay at the poverty-stricken excellent city. It was even more out of the blue for a powerful warrior like Baberchi to fly past the city without restraining their killing intent. In the city lord's mansion situated at the center of the city, a middle-aged man with a pot-belly sensed the killing intent in the atmosphere. His expression darkened. Although the excellent city was but a small and poor land, no other shore realm warrior dared challenge the entire city like this before. As he looked up at the sky, he squinted thoughtfully. Baberchi, who managed to piss him off? Although there was no super force in the Gracious Province, there were still some powerful clans. The Chi clan, led by Baberchi, was one of them. The Chi clan was located in the center of Gracious Province, and had been well managed by Baberchi over the years. The city lord bore this in mind as Baberchi flew through his city. In the end, he decided to let the warrior pass through the excellent city without conflict. Shortly thereafter, Baberchi made it to the Cyan Brocade Plain. He was accompanied by multitudes of guards. Although the cave on the Cyan Brocade Plain was very secluded, it was not difficult to pinpoint the exact place, as they had already confirmed the location prior. After some scouting, one of the guards rushed to Baberchi. Master Baber, we found the cave. Let's go. In a flash, Baberchi entered the cave. They hadn't been in the cave long when Baberchi's eyes flashed as he spotted something on the stone wall. He reached out to knock on it. Sure enough, he pulled out a small creature from a crevice on the stone wall. The guard next to him glanced at what he was doing. It's a noxious army ant raised by Guido. We've found the exact place. Baberchi rubbed his two fingers together, squishing the noxious army ant. A green shadow shrouded his hand, giving him the strength to press even harder on the ant. Even a consummate true god would have difficulty killing a noxious army ant. Baberchi, however, crushed it to pieces with a simple pinch. Alan always hung around with these shady characters. That was why he ended up like this. Baberchi exclaimed with a click of his tongue as he headed deeper into the cave. After a short while, they reached the innermost part of the cave. Prior to their arrival, Zen had burned the corpses of those consummate true gods so as to destroy the evidence. Only traces of messy fighting were left. Baberchi looked around as he stood at the position of the tomb. He closed his eyes, lost in his thoughts. Suddenly, his eyes shot open, his expression darkening. There seemed to have been a powerful ghost here. How did my grandson manage to offend such a ghost? He initially thought his grandson had been murdered. However, the evidence pointed towards his death being caused by a ghost. This news calmed him down somewhat. Another guard lowered his head and said, if a ghost killed Mr. Allen, it would be impossible for the ghost to destroy his body. Baberchi nodded gravely. Maybe Alan's friends were afraid I would take revenge, and ran away with his body. Or perhaps the body was destroyed by someone else. He paused for a while. Let's go to the Mice League. I must find my grandson's body. Exiting the cave, the group of warriors returned to Excellent City. Without any hesitation, they headed straight for the Mice League. Meanwhile, a huge flying ship of more than 10,000 feet wide arrived at the east port of the Excellent City. 4 figures in cyan materialized from the flying ship, 3 men and a woman. The woman's face was a deathly pale, and her figure shuddered from fatigue. It could easily be seen that she was weak. As she staggered forward, it was as though she was a walking corpse. Even so, there was a morbid beauty about her. The 4 people who dismounted the flying ship were all powerful warriors at the other shore realm. However, the status of the woman was obviously much higher than that of the 3 men. I wonder who Kenomlai is. The woman said weakly. Let's go to the city lord's mansion and ask him about it. A handsome man bowed before her, his hands folded neatly in front of him. I will lead the way for you. The woman nodded slightly, and without any further hesitation, they headed to the city lord. Meanwhile, Baberchi and his warriors had made it to the Mice League's house. He tossed 1,000 divine crystals in the direction of the ear mouse. The Mice League members always treated people differently according to their social standing. If a consummate true god and another shore realm warrior came to buy the same piece of news, the difference in price was huge. Baberchi knew this. He could have sent his guards to buy the news, but he wanted to hear the news himself, for the sake of his grandson. After the ear mouse took in these divine crystals, a magic array was finally presented in front of Baberchi. It was the scene of his grandson entering the cave. I want to see the result, Baberchi said in a low voice. The ear mouse nodded and then squeaked. A powerful soul pressure burst out from this cave. We, the mice, could not get close, so we were unable to catch everything. But you should be interested in the following scenes. Then Baberchi saw the scene wherein Kinelm and the others burned the corpses. Baberchi snorted angrily. He whipped out a bunch of divine crystals and threw them in front of the ear mouse. Tell me where they are. Baberchi left the Mice League and headed straight to a place in the Excellence City with his guards. Whoosh! Baberchi directly flew down from thousands of feet high, landing on the place where Kinelm lived. It was a large house. However, the moment Baberchi set foot in the house, all the rooms collapsed in an instant. The ground cracked, forming crevices reminiscent of a spider's web. Kinelm Lai, get your rear over here! Baberchi roared, and a stream of air spread out in all directions. Cracks suddenly snaked their way through the houses surrounding Kinelm's. The divine citizens living here suddenly grew deaf from the sheer force of Baberchi's energy, blood gushing out of their ears. Kinelm had been hanging about with Zen these days. At this moment, the two of them were having a chat over a cup of tea in the backyard. Zen had been eager to learn something about the Gracious Province and the Source World. All of a sudden, when they saw the house collapse in front of them, both immediately fell silent. Their expressions darkened as they locked eyes with the figure emanating a fierce killing intent in front of them.